Nobody expected Tyler Hayes to uncover one of the most valuable automotive treasures in American history, hidden beneath decades of dust and ridicule in what everyone called the most worthless garage in Cumberland County, was a collection of pristine muscle cars worth over $200 million. These vehicles represented an American legacy that vanished after the oil crisis of 1973. The same neighbors who had mocked him for inheriting Captain Frank's pile of junk would stand speechless as the dust covers were pulled back one by one, revealing automotive masterpieces that time forgot. This is the story of a combat veteran turned small-town mechanic whose inheritance of scrap metal and broken dreams became the discovery that would rewrite automotive history forever. Tyler Hayes, former SEAL Team 6 mechanical specialist, never imagined his uncle's weathered barn held anything but rust and regret. He was wrong. What waited inside would challenge everything he knew about his family, his country's industrial heritage, and himself. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cracked asphalt of Hayes Auto Repair, illuminating the peeling paint on the hand-lettered sign that Tyler had installed 3 months ago when he'd foolishly thought things might turn around. Now, as he crouched beneath Mrs. Chen's rusted Honda Civic trying to coax life back into a transmission that should have been scrapped years ago, the bitter irony wasn't lost on him. 6 months ago, he'd been Tyler Hayes' special warfare combatant, craft crewman, United States Navy SEALs responsible for maintaining an entire fleet of military vehicles worth millions of dollars. Today, he was just another struggling mechanic in a town that seemed to specialize in watching dreams die slowly. The wrench slipped from his oil-slicked fingers, clattering against the concrete floor as he suppressed a curse. His lower back, still carrying shrapnel fragments from that IED outside Kandahar, sent sharp reminders up his spine with every movement. The VA doctors had been clear about his limitations, though they'd been less helpful about solutions. Service-connected disability, they called it, as if giving it a name somehow made the constant ache more bearable or the sleepless nights easier to endure. "Tell you under there," Mrs. Chen's voice carried a note of worried impatience that had become all too familiar in recent weeks. She was one of the few customers who still brought her car to him more out of pity than confidence, he suspected. "Almost done, Mrs. Chen," he called out, though they both knew he was lying. The transmission needed a complete rebuild, something that would cost more than the 15-year-old Civic was worth. But Mrs. Chen couldn't afford a new car, and Tyler couldn't afford to turn away any paying customer, no matter how small the profit margin. He slid out from under the car, wiping his hands on a rag that had long since given up any pretense of cleanliness. Mrs. Chen stood in the doorway of the garage bay, her expression caught between hope and resignation. Behind her, Tyler could see the gleaming facade of Barrett's Auto Service across the street, where Logan Barrett's team of certified technicians worked in spotless uniforms under fluorescent lights that actually illuminated their work properly. "I'm afraid it's going to need more work than we hoped," Tyler said, hating the words even as he spoke them. "The transmission's shot. I can patch it temporarily, but it won't last more than a few weeks." Mrs. Chen's shoulders sagged. "How much for the patch job?" $50. For a proper rebuild, we're looking at 800, maybe 1,000 with parts. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the car that represented her lifeline to her job at the textile plant 20 miles away. Tyler knew the math as well as she did. $800 might as well have been $8 million for someone living paycheck to paycheck in Cumberland. "Do the patch," she said finally. "Maybe it'll last until I can save up some money." As Tyler returned to work beneath the Honda, he tried to ignore the laughter drifting across the street from Barrett's Auto Service. Logan Barrett and his crew made no secret of their amusement at his situation. Hayes' junkyard, they called it, though never to his face. They were too smart for that. Tyler might be struggling financially, but 10 years in the Navy had left him with skills that went beyond automotive repair. The laughter grew louder, and Tyler caught fragments of conversation carried on the autumn wind. "Can't believe he actually thought he could make a go of it. Captain Frank's pile of scrap metal should have just sold the land and moved on." Captain Frank. Franklin Hayes, his father's older brother, the family eccentric who had spent 40 years hoarding cars in increasingly deteriorating condition. When the lawyers had called 6 months ago to inform Tyler that he'd inherited Frank's property, including the garage and associated automotive inventory, Tyler had driven down from Norfolk with cautious optimism. Maybe this was the break he needed. A chance to start over in a place where nobody knew about the nightmares or the pills or the reasons he'd left his job at the Norfolk Naval Shipyard. That optimism had lasted exactly 30 minutes, the time it took to walk through Frank's garage and the massive barn behind it. Rusted hulks, stripped chassis engines, seized solid with decades of neglect. The neighbors had gathered to watch his face as reality set in their expressions ranging from sympathetic to openly amused. Frank was always going to leave that mess to somebody, old Bill Patterson had chuckled. Guess you drew the short straw, son. The joke had spread through Cumberland like wildfire. Tyler Hayes, the sucker who inherited a junkyard and thought he could turn it into a real business. The few customers who did venture into his garage came with the attitude of people doing charity work, bringing him their most hopeless cases because, as one farmer had put it, can't make them any worse, right? Tyler finished patching Mrs. Chen's transmission as the sun reached its zenith, sending waves of heat through the open bay doors. The garage had no air conditioning, and the ancient fans Frank had installed sometime in the 1980s did little more than push the hot air around. His work shirt, a faded blue button-down with Tyler embroidered over the pocket, clung to his back with sweat and motor oil. That should get you by for a while, he told Mrs. Chen, though they both knew he was optimistic. She pressed $50 into his palm, the bills damp with her own nervous perspiration. Thank you, Tyler. I know things are tough right now, but you're a good man. This town needs people like you. Her words carried more kindness than he'd heard in weeks, and Tyler felt his throat tighten unexpectedly. Just trying to help where I can, Mrs. Chen. After she drove away, her Honda coughing ominously as it disappeared down Main Street, Tyler stood alone in his empty garage. The silence was deafening after months of hoping for the steady hum of activity that never materialized. He walked to the ancient cash register Frank had used for decades, its brass keys worn smooth by countless transactions. The days take $50, enough to buy groceries for 3 days if he was careful. The mortgage payment on the property was due in 2 weeks. $1,200 that might as well have been $12 million. Tyler had already sold everything of value he owned, including his truck-making due, now with Frank's ancient Ford pickup that leaked oil and started only when the weather gods smiled upon it. The VA disability check covered his basic needs barely, but it wasn't enough to sustain a business that required constant investment in tools, parts, and equipment. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts, pausing at numbers he'd been avoiding for weeks. Commander Mitchell, his old supervisor at Norfolk, had left 3 voicemails about positions opening up on the maintenance crew. Good jobs, union jobs, the kind of steady work that would solve his immediate financial problems. All he had to do was admit defeat, sell Frank's property for whatever he could get, and return to Virginia with his tail between his legs. The thought of facing his former coworkers, of explaining why his grand plan had failed so spectacularly, made his stomach churn, but pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. Tyler was reaching for his phone when he heard the distinctive rumble of a muscle car engine approaching. He looked up to see a pristine 1969 Shelby GT500 pulling into his driveway, its 428 Cobra Jet V8 purring with the kind of precision that spoke of meticulous maintenance and unlimited resources. The car was painted in factory-correct Acapulco blue with white racing stripes, its chrome bumpers reflecting the afternoon sun like mirrors. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a man who looked like he'd walked off the pages of a classic car magazine, late 50s, silver hair perfectly styled, wearing a polo shirt that probably cost more than Tyler made in a week. Everything about him screamed money and success, from his spotless, white sneakers to the gold Rolex catching the light on his wrist. Tyler Hayes, the man called out, his voice carrying the confidence of someone accustomed to being heard and obeyed. That's me, Tyler replied, suddenly conscious of his grimy appearance and the stark contrast between this visitor and his usual clientele. The man approached with an extended hand and a practiced smile. James Wilson, I've driven down from Richmond specifically to see you. Tyler accepted the handshake, noting the calloused palm that suggested this man, unlike most wealthy collectors, had held a wrench more than once. Richmond's a long way to come for automotive repair, Mr. Wilson. I think you might have me confused with someone else. Wilson's laugh was genuine and slightly gruff. Oh, I'm not here for repairs, Mr. Hayes. I'm here about your uncle's collection. The word collection hung in the air like a bad joke. Tyler gestured toward the visible portion of Frank's accumulated automotive disasters. I'm not sure what you've heard, but there's no collection here, just a lot of scrap metal that's been sitting too long. Yes, I can see that. Wilson said, his gaze taking in the rusted hulks with obvious disdain. But I'm more interested in what might be stored in that barn behind the garage, the one that's been locked up for, 30 years or so. Tyler felt a flicker of something he couldn't quite identify. Interest, hope, more likely just curiosity about why this obviously wealthy man had driven 3 hours to look at junk. The barn's just storage, Tyler said carefully. Farm equipment, old parts, things like that. Nothing that would interest a classic car collector. Wilson's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Hayes, your Uncle Frank and I had several conversations over the years. He was quite secretive about what he kept in that barn, but he let slip enough details to intrigue me. I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer for whatever's in there. Sight unseen. How generous, Tyler found himself asking, though he immediately regretted showing interest. $50,000, Wilson said without hesitation. Cash today for everything in the barn. No questions asked, no inspections required. Just sign the papers and walk away with enough money to start fresh somewhere else. The offer hit Tyler like a physical blow. $50,000 would solve every immediate problem he faced, pay off the mortgage, settle his debts, maybe even have enough left over to relocate and start over properly, all for whatever junk Frank had been hoarding in a barn that Tyler had never even bothered to explore thoroughly. That's a very generous offer, Tyler said slowly, his mind racing through the implications. But I'd need to know what I'm selling before I agree to anything. Wilson's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Mr. Hayes, I'm offering you a way out of what is clearly a difficult situation. Sometimes it's better not to ask too many questions. The comment stung because it was accurate. Tyler was drowning financially, and everyone in Cumberland knew it. But something in Wilson's eagerness and his obvious desire to avoid actually seeing what he was buying triggered a warning signal that Tyler had learned to trust during his military service. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Wilson, but I'll need some time to think about it. The man's smile became strained. Time is a luxury you may not have, Mr. Hayes. I've done my research on your financial situation. This offer won't be available indefinitely. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Tyler felt his jaw tighten as old instincts kicked in. He'd faced down insurgents in Afghanistan who tried to intimidate him with far more direct methods than James Wilson's polished menace. Then I guess I better make my decision carefully, Tyler replied, his voice carrying a calm that belied the anger building in his chest. Wilson studied him for a moment, then shrugged with practiced indifference. Your choice, of course, but opportunities like this don't come along often in places like Cumberland. He reached into his pocket and produced an expensive business card. Call me when you're ready to be reasonable. As the Shelby rumbled away, Tyler stood holding the business card and wondering what exactly he had just turned down. $50,000 was more money than he'd ever held at one time, certainly more than anything in Frank's barn could possibly be worth. But Wilson's eagerness, his reluctance to actually inspect the merchandise, had triggered every suspicious instinct Tyler possessed. For the first time since inheriting the property, Tyler found himself genuinely curious about what Uncle Frank had been hiding in that locked barn for the past 3 decades. But he also understood that whatever Frank had left him was valuable enough to attract serious attention from people who weren't accustomed to taking no for an answer. The rest of that afternoon passed in restless contemplation as Tyler tried to focus on routine maintenance tasks, while Wilson's offer echoed in his mind. $50,000 for contents unseen suggested either incredible generosity or knowledge of something valuable that Tyler himself didn't possess. Neither explanation sat comfortably with him, particularly given the collector's obvious reluctance to actually examine what he was so eager to purchase. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting longer shadows across the garage floor, Tyler heard the distinctive sound of another classic car approaching. This time, however, the engine note was wrong, stuttering, and missing with the irregular rhythm that spoke of serious mechanical distress. A 1970 Plymouth Barracuda limped into his driveway, its 446-pack engine coughing like a chain smoker in the final stages of emphysema. The deep plum crazy purple paint still shone despite the car's obvious mechanical distress. The driver, who emerged from the legendary muscle car, looked to be in her early 60s with silver-streaked dark hair beneath a well-worn baseball cap and clothes that spoke of academic comfort rather than flashy wealth. Her face carried the intelligent lines of someone who had spent decades in serious thought and her movements as she approached Tyler suggested the careful deliberation of authority rather than age. "You Tyler Hayes?" the woman asked, her voice carrying a no-nonsense directness. "That's right. Sounds like your CUDA's having some serious troubles." The woman nodded grimly. "Dr. Eleanor Carter. I teach automotive design history at Virginia Commonwealth University. Was driving this beauty to show at the muscle car exhibit in Richmond tomorrow, but she started acting up about 50 miles back. Been nursing her along ever since, barely keeping her running." Tyler walked around the Barracuda, his trained ear cataloging the engine's irregular firing pattern, while his eyes took in details that most people would miss. The car was a genuine numbers-matching example, not one of the countless clones that flooded classic car shows. The VIN tag, the distinctive hood with twin air intakes, the side exhaust outlets, everything checked out as authentic. But more importantly, this particular CUDA had been restored with a level of attention to detail that bordered on obsession. "This is a numbers-matching car," Tyler observed, running his hand along the front fender. "Original engine, transmission, rear end. Someone spent serious money and time bringing her back to factory specification." Dr. Carter's eyebrows rose slightly. "You can tell all that just from looking. The details tell the story," Tyler replied, popping the hood to reveal the massive 440 cubic inch engine with its triple two-barrel carburetors. Paint codes casting numbers, date stamps. Most people restore these cars to look good at car shows, but whoever worked on this one cared about authenticity. The engine bay revealed the source of the problem immediately. The distributor cap showed signs of moisture intrusion, and several plug wires displayed the telltale crackling of electrical breakdown. But as Tyler examined the system more closely, he noticed something that made him pause. "Dr. Carter, this distributor isn't original to your car." Carter leaned in, squinting at the component Tyler was indicating. "What do you mean? See this part number?" Tyler pointed to the barely visible stamping on the distributor housing. "This is from a 1971 model year. Your car should have the earlier unit with the different advance curve. It'll run, but not the way Chrysler intended." Carter stared at him with obvious surprise. "How in the hell do you know that?" Tyler had asked himself the same question countless times over the years. The knowledge was just there, accumulated through decades of obsessive study and hands-on experience that had begun in his father's garage when he was barely tall enough to see over the fender of a car. Military service had expanded his understanding of engines and mechanical systems, but his real education had come from nights spent with technical manuals and weekends hunting salvage yards and swap meets. "I've always had a thing for muscle cars," Tyler said, understating the truth by several orders of magnitude. "Spent a lot of years studying the details that matter." "Well, can you fix it?" Carter asked. "I've got reservations at the hotel in Richmond, and this car show means a lot to me. First time I've shown her since my husband passed." The comment hit Tyler unexpectedly. He recognized the look in Carter's eyes, the determination to honor someone's memory through mechanical perfection. "Let me take a closer look." For the next hour, Tyler worked on the Barracuda with a precision and focus that felt almost meditative. He replaced the faulty distributor cap and plug wires, but went further, adjusting the timing and carburetor settings to optimize the engine's performance. As he worked, Carter watched with growing amazement at the depth of Tyler's knowledge. "You know," Carter said as Tyler fine-tuned the idle mixture, "I've had this car to 3 different shops over the past year. Each one told me it was running fine, that the minor issues I was hearing were just part of owning a classic car." "They weren't listening to what the engine was telling them," Tyler replied, making a final adjustment to the timing. "A 446 pack has a very specific sound when everything's properly synchronized. Most people hear an engine that starts and assume that's good enough." Tyler stepped back and nodded toward the driver's seat. "Try her now." Carter turned the key, and the transformation was immediate. The Barracuda's engine settled into a smooth, powerful idle that resonated with authority. As Carter revved the engine, the sound was pure mechanical poetry, each cylinder firing with perfect timing and fuel mixture. "Jesus Christ," Carter breathed, her face lighting up with the kind of joy that comes from hearing a beloved machine perform exactly as its designers intended. "She hasn't sounded this good since the day I bought her." Tyler wiped his hands on his rag, trying to hide his own satisfaction at the work. "Take her for a drive around the block. Make sure everything feels right." Carter didn't need to be asked twice. The CUDA pulled away from the garage with a throaty rumble that turned heads even on Cumberland's quiet Main Street. Tyler watched it disappear around the corner, then noticed the small crowd that had gathered across the street at Barrett's Auto Service. Logan Barrett and his crew stood outside their shop, clearly listening to the Barracuda's engine note with expressions of surprise and grudging respect. When Carter returned 5 minutes later, her grin was wide enough to split her face. "Mister, I don't know how you did it, but this car feels like it did when I first brought it home from the restoration shop. Better even. How much do I owe you?" Tyler considered the question. The work had taken him barely an hour, and the parts were standard maintenance items. At Barrett's Auto Service, they would have charged at least $300 for similar work, probably more given the car's value and the customer's obvious attachment to it. $50 for the parts, Tyler said. No charge for the labor. Carter stared at him as if he'd spoken in a foreign language. "Son, you just solved a problem that 3 other shops couldn't figure out, and you want $50? You're traveling to honor your husband's memory," Tyler replied quietly. "I understand what that means." Carter's expression softened, and for a moment Tyler thought the older woman might tear up. Instead, she pulled out her wallet and counted out $200. "The extra is a tip," Carter said firmly when Tyler started to protest, "and I want you to have this." She handed Tyler a business card, but not her own. The card read, "Jerry Blackburn Barrett Jackson Auction Company," with a phone number and email address. "Jerry's a friend of mine, been in the classic car business for 30 years. He's always looking for people who really understand these machines, not just the guys who can make them look pretty. You call him and tell him Eleanor Carter sent you." As the Barracuda rumbled away into the gathering dusk, Tyler stood holding the business card and the money, aware that something significant had just occurred. Word would spread about what he'd accomplished in his humble garage. Eleanor Carter would tell the story at the car show tomorrow, and car enthusiasts had a way of communicating that rivaled any modern social network. More immediately, Logan Barrett was walking across the street, his usual smirk replaced by an expression of curiosity and calculation. "Hell of a thing you just did there, Hayes," Barrett said, jerking his thumb toward the retreating taillights of the CUDA. "Old Eleanor's been complaining about that car's performance for months. Brought it to my shop twice, and my guys couldn't find anything wrong with it." Tyler nodded but didn't respond, sensing there was more coming. "Thing is," Barrett continued, "that was some pretty specialized knowledge you showed off there. Makes a man wonder what other skills you might be hiding." The comment wasn't entirely friendly, carrying undertones that Tyler recognized from his military days. Barrett was recalibrating his assessment, realizing that the laughingstock mechanic he'd been mocking might represent more competition than he'd anticipated. "Just trying to help where I can," Tyler replied evenly. Barrett studied him for a moment longer, then shrugged. "Well, good luck with that, but you might want to be careful about undercharging for specialized work. Gives people the wrong impression about what quality service should cost." After Barrett returned to his shop, Tyler found himself alone again, with his thoughts and the increasingly mysterious question of what Uncle Frank had left him. The day's events had reminded him of truths he'd been trying to forget. He was exceptionally good at understanding the automobiles, particularly the classic American muscle cars that represented the pinnacle of automotive engineering from a bygone era. During his years at Norfolk working on naval vessels, Tyler had been the go-to person when prototype engines developed unexpected problems. His supervisors had learned to trust his instincts about mechanical systems, even when computer diagnostics failed to identify issues that Tyler could hear in an engine's idle or feel through a steering wheel's vibration. But that expertise had felt like a burden rather than a gift when PTSD made it impossible to focus consistently, when the sounds of the shipyard triggered flashbacks to convoy operations in Afghanistan. The VA counselors had suggested finding work that utilized his mechanical skills without the high-pressure environment and rigid schedules of military maintenance. Uncle Frank's garage had seemed like the perfect solution, a chance to work at his own pace, in a quiet setting where his knowledge and experience would be valued. Instead, he'd found himself trapped in a cycle of barely profitable repairs on dying vehicles, his reputation undermined by his inherited association with Frank's decades of automotive hoarding. The irony was almost too painful to contemplate. He possessed the knowledge and skills to work on some of the most valuable automobiles ever manufactured, but lacked the credibility and resources to attract the customers who owned such machines. Eleanor Carter's CUDA had represented a glimpse of what his professional life could be under different circumstances, working on a properly maintained classic car solving problems that required genuine expertise rather than just parts replacement, seeing the satisfaction on an owner's face when mechanical perfection was achieved. That was the kind of work that had originally drawn him to automotive repair, the intersection of technical knowledge and craftsmanship that transformed metal and machinery into something approaching art. As darkness settled over Cumberland, Tyler walked to the barn behind his garage and stood before its locked doors. The structure was larger than it appeared from a distance, probably 40 by 60 feet, with the roof high enough to accommodate even the tallest vehicles. Frank had always kept it locked, claiming it contained farm equipment and spare parts that weren't worth the trouble of organizing properly. But if that were true, why would James Wilson drive 3 hours from Richmond to offer $50,000 for the contents? And why had he been so reluctant to actually examine what he was proposing to purchase? Tyler pulled out his phone and dialed the number on Jerry Blackburn's business card. It rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. "Blackburn, Mr. Blackburn, this is Tyler Hayes from Cumberland. Eleanor Carter suggested I call you." "Hayes," Blackburn's voice carried a note of recognition. "Eleanor called me about an hour ago, said you worked some kind of magic on her CUDA, fixed problems that 3 other shops missed." "I just listened to what the engine was telling me," Tyler replied. Blackburn chuckled. "Son, if you understood everything that Eleanor told me about what you did to her car, you've got the kind of knowledge that can make you rich in this business. Question is, what are you doing stuck in some small town fixing grocery getters?" It was a fair question, one that Tyler didn't have a simple answer for. "Circumstances," he said finally. "Well, circumstances change," Blackburn replied. "Eleanor says you've got an eye for authenticity, can spot details that most people miss. That's a rare skill in the classic car world. You ever think about getting into restoration consulting, authentication work? The high-end collectors pay serious money for people who can tell them what's real and what's fake." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes with Blackburn explaining the various opportunities available to someone with Tyler's apparent expertise. By the time they ended the call, Tyler had been invited to attend the next Barrett-Jackson auction as Blackburn's guest, with the possibility of working as a technical consultant if he proved as knowledgeable as Carter's recommendations suggested. As Tyler hung up the phone, he realized that his perspective on his situation had shifted dramatically in the span of a single afternoon. Eleanor Carter's Barracuda had reminded him that he possessed skills and knowledge that were genuinely valuable, not just the ability to patch together failing vehicles with creative solutions and minimal resources. The question now was what Uncle Frank had really left him, and whether James Wilson's eager offer represented an opportunity to be seized or a warning to be heeded. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp October clarity that made even Cumberland's modest downtown look picturesque. Tyler had spent a restless night thinking about Eleanor Carter's CUDA, Jerry Blackburn's job offer, and most persistently James Wilson's mysterious eagerness to purchase contents unseen. By the time he opened the garage at 7:00 a.m., he had made a decision that surprised him with its certainty. Before he accepted or rejected any offers, he was going to find out exactly what Uncle Frank had been hiding in that barn. The morning brought an unexpected stream of customers' word having spread overnight about the Barracuda repair with the speed that characterized small-town communication networks. First came Janet Morrison with her husband's prized 1969 Mustang Mach 1, complaining of a rough idle that 3 previous mechanics had attributed to normal classic car behavior. Tyler spent 20 minutes diagnosing a vacuum leak that had been masked by an overly rich carburetor adjustment, then corrected both issues while Janet watched in fascination. "How did you know to look there?" she asked as Tyler demonstrated the smooth idle that resulted from proper flow and air mixture. "The engine was working too hard to maintain proper combustion," Tyler explained, wiping his hands on a clean rag. "When you compensate for one problem by creating another, you usually end up with symptoms that don't make sense until you address the root cause." By noon, he had worked on a 1968 Camaro SS with timing issues, a 1970 Chevelle SS 454 with a mysterious oil leak, and a 1967 Corvette Stingray, whose owner had driven 60 miles after hearing about the guy who actually knows these old engines. Each repair showcased knowledge that went far beyond basic mechanical competence, revealing an understanding of automotive engineering that impressed even the most knowledgeable car enthusiasts. Logan Barrett appeared during Tyler's lunch break, his usual swagger replaced by something approaching respect. "Hell of a morning you've had, Hayes," he said, gesturing toward the Mustang that Janet Morrison was driving away with obvious satisfaction. "Word's getting around that you've got some kind of special touch with the muscle cars." Tyler unwrapped the sandwich he'd brought from home, noting that Barrett seemed genuinely curious rather than hostile. "Just paying attention to what the engines are telling me. Thing is," Barrett continued, settling onto an upturned crate that served as makeshift seating in Tyler's sparse garage. "I've been working on cars for 25 years, and I've never seen anyone diagnose problems that fast. Makes a man wonder where you learned that kind of troubleshooting." The question hung in the air between them, carrying implications that Tyler wasn't entirely comfortable exploring. His knowledge had accumulated over decades through a combination of formal training, practical experience, and an almost obsessive study of automotive engineering principles. But the intuitive understanding that allowed him to hear problems in an engine's rhythm or feel issues through a steering wheel's feedback was something deeper, harder to explain or quantify. "Military maintenance experience," Tyler said finally, which was true enough without being complete. "Different equipment, but the principles are the same." Barrett nodded slowly, but his expression suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied with the explanation. "Well, whatever you learned over there, it's sure getting people's attention around here. Might want to consider raising your prices before word spreads too far. These classic car people got money, and they're not used to getting quality work at bargain rates." After Barrett left, Tyler found himself alone with thoughts that had been building all morning. Each successful repair had reinforced what Eleanor Carter's coup d'etat had reminded him: he possessed expertise that was genuinely valuable in the right context. The muscle car restoration and collector market represented exactly that context, a world where technical knowledge and attention to detail commanded premium prices and professional respect. But breaking into that world required more than just skill. It demanded credibility, connections, and most importantly, a kind of reputation that took years to build. Tyler was beginning to understand that Uncle Frank's mysterious barn might represent more than just a potential source of quick cash. If it contained what James Wilson seemed to think it did, it could be the key to establishing himself in a market where his knowledge would be valued rather than tolerated. The afternoon brought a retired Marine Corps colonel who drove a meticulously maintained 1969 Dodge Charger RT. Unlike his morning customers who had come seeking repairs, the colonel appeared to be conducting some kind of informal interview disguised as a routine maintenance visit. "I've heard interesting things about your work, Mr. Hayes," he said, watching as Tyler performed a comprehensive inspection of his Charger's engine bay. "Eleanor Carter called me from Richmond last night, quite excited about what you accomplished with her Barracuda." Tyler continued his examination, noting that the colonel's car was maintained to Concours-level standards. Every component showed evidence of careful attention, from the properly torqued fasteners to the correct date-coded hoses and belts. "Carter has a beautiful car. The person who restored it understood how important authenticity is to proper performance." "That would be Franklin Hayes," the colonel said quietly. "Your Uncle Frank did the restoration work on Eleanor's Cuda along with about 40 other cars over the past 30 years. Tyler straightened up so quickly that he nearly hit his head on the hood. "Uncle Frank restored that Barracuda." The colonel nodded, his eyes studying Tyler's reaction carefully. "Franklin was one of the finest restoration specialists in the mid-Atlantic, though he worked very quietly and only accepted projects that interested him personally. He had an almost supernatural understanding of how these engines were supposed to perform when they left the factory." The revelation hit Tyler like a physical blow. During his childhood visits to Frank's garage, he had seen his uncle as something of an eccentric hoarder, a man who collected automotive detritus without any apparent system or purpose. The idea that Frank had been a master craftsman working at the highest levels of restoration art challenged everything Tyler thought he knew about his inheritance. "I had no idea," Tyler said. "Honestly, he never talked about restoration work. I thought he just collected old cars." "Franklin was very private about his business," the colonel explained. "He never advertised, never displayed his work at shows, never sought recognition for what he accomplished. People found him through word of mouth, usually after other restorers had failed to solve particularly difficult problems. He paused, studying Tyler with the same analytical attention he had been applying to his engine. Eleanor tells me you demonstrate the same intuitive understanding of these machines that your uncle possessed. The ability to hear what's wrong and know instinctively how to fix it. Tyler felt uncomfortable under Dia's scrutiny, uncertain where this conversation was leading. I've always had a feel for engines. Yes, I can see that. The colonel gestured towards his Charger. This car was one of Franklin's last projects before he became ill. He spent 8 months researching the correct specifications for every component, tracking down original parts that most people would have replaced with modern equivalents. The result is a car that performs exactly as Dodge intended in 1969. As if to demonstrate his point, the colonel started the Charger, and the engine settled into an idle that was almost too smooth to believe. The sound was pure automotive perfection, each cylinder firing with the precision of a Swiss watch. Now I understand why Eleanor was so excited, Tyler said, listening to the engine with newfound appreciation. This is how they're supposed to sound. Exactly. And according to Eleanor, you managed to achieve similar results with her CUDA using nothing more than basic tools and your understanding of how the engine should perform. That suggests you inherited more than just Franklin's property, Mr. Hayes. The implication was clear, and Tyler found himself struggling to process its significance. If Uncle Frank had been a master restorer rather than simply a collector, then the barn behind the garage might contain something far more valuable than James Wilson's $50,000 offer suggested. Colonel, what do you know about the cars in Frank's barn? His expression became guarded, as if he were choosing his words with military precision. I know that Franklin was very secretive about his personal collections separate from the restoration work he performed for clients. He mentioned it occasionally, always in vague terms, but never allowed anyone to see what he kept there. But you have some idea of what might be in there. The colonel was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving from Tyler to the locked barn, visible through the garage's rear entrance. Franklin once told me that he had been saving the best examples for last, waiting until he had the time and resources to restore them properly. He said they represented the pinnacle of American automotive engineering from the muscle car era. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another customer, a nervous-looking man in an expensive suit who parked a late-model Mercedes well away from the work area. He approached with the tentative steps of someone venturing into unfamiliar territory. "Excuse me, are you Tyler Hayes?" he asked, his voice carrying the polished tones of professional success. "That's right. What can I do for you?" The man glanced at the colonel, then back to Tyler. "My name is Daniel Roberts. I'm an attorney here in town. I was hoping we could speak privately about a legal matter." The colonel took the hint gracefully. "I should be going anyway," he said, shaking Tyler's hand with surprising firmness. "Thank you for the inspection, Mr. Hayes. And remember what I said about your uncle's legacy." After he drove away, Roberts moved closer to Tyler, his expression serious. "Mr. Hayes, I represent certain parties who are interested in acquiring your uncle's property. I understand you've received an offer for the contents of the barn, but my clients are prepared to make a substantially better proposal." Tyler felt a familiar weariness creeping over him. What kind of proposal? Complete purchase of the entire property for $200,000 cash, with a 30-day closing period. No inspections, no contingencies, no questions asked. The offer was so far beyond anything Tyler had imagined that he initially wondered if he'd misheard. $200,000 would solve every financial problem he faced and provide enough capital to establish himself anywhere he chose. It was life-changing money, the kind of sum that represented complete freedom from his current struggles. But the same instincts that had warned him about James Wilson were now screaming about Daniel Roberts' offer. Why would anyone pay $200,000 for property they hadn't inspected? What did these mysterious clients know about Uncle Frank's barn that he didn't? "That's a very generous offer," Tyler said carefully, "but I'd need to know who your clients are and why they're interested in the property." Roberts' expression tightened slightly. "My clients prefer to remain anonymous, and their reasons are their own business. What matters is that they're offering you a way out of what I understand is a difficult financial situation." The comment carried the same subtle threat that had characterized Wilson's visit, the implication that Tyler's circumstances made him vulnerable to pressure. But something had changed since yesterday's encounter. Eleanor Carter's Barracuda and the Colonel's revelations about Uncle Frank had shifted Tyler's perspective on both his own abilities and his inheritance. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Roberts, but I'm not ready to make any decisions about the property just yet. Roberts studied him for a moment, clearly surprised by the response. Mr. Hayes, I hope you understand that opportunities like this don't remain available indefinitely. Sometimes it's wise to accept a generous offer rather than risk losing everything by being too ambitious. The threat was more direct this time, and Tyler felt his military training kick in. He dealt with intimidation tactics before, usually from people who mistook financial desperation for weakness. I understand perfectly, Tyler replied, his voice carrying a calm that belied the anger building beneath the surface. And I understand that when multiple parties are competing to buy something sight unseen, it usually means that something is more valuable than they're willing to admit. Roberts's facade cracked slightly, revealing frustration beneath the professional polish. You're making a mistake, Hayes. My clients don't like to be kept waiting, and they don't make offers like this twice. After Roberts drove away, Tyler stood alone in his garage processing the day's revelations. Uncle Frank hadn't been a hoarder at all, but a master craftsman whose work commanded respect from the most knowledgeable collectors in the region. The barn didn't contain junk, but potentially the finest examples of muscle car engineering that Frank had been saving for his own restoration projects. And now multiple parties were competing to acquire those cars, offering sums that suggested extraordinary value, while desperately trying to avoid revealing exactly what they were purchasing. For the first time since inheriting the property, Tyler felt genuine excitement about what he might discover behind those locked barn doors. But he also understood that whatever Frank had left him was valuable enough to attract serious attention from people who weren't accustomed to taking no for an answer. As the sun set over Cumberland, Tyler walked to the barn and examined its locks with new purpose. Tomorrow he decided he would finally learn what Uncle Frank had really left him, and then he would decide whether to sell his inheritance or use it to build the kind of future that his newfound reputation suggested might be possible. The keys to the barn were hanging on a hook in Frank's cluttered office, exactly where they had been gathering dust for the past 6 months, while Tyler struggled to make sense of his inheritance. Tomorrow everything would change. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Tyler made his way to the barn. Uncle Frank's keys were heavy in his palm, like the weight of destiny itself. He had awakened before dawn with a restless energy that made sleep impossible, his mind churning with possibilities and fears in equal measure. The events of the previous day had fundamentally altered his understanding of both his inheritance and his own potential, transforming what he had dismissed as worthless junk into something that might represent the opportunity of a lifetime. The barn's exterior showed decades of weathering, its red paint faded to a rusty brown that blended with the autumn landscape. 2 massive sliding doors dominated the front facade, secured with heavy-duty padlocks that looked far more substantial than anything protecting the contents of a typical farm storage building. Tyler noted the thick steel hasps and reinforced hinges, security measures that seemed excessive for protecting agricultural equipment or spare automotive parts. As he fumbled with the first lock, Tyler became aware of subtle details he had previously overlooked. The barn sat on a concrete foundation rather than the typical wooden posts used for agricultural buildings. Ventilation grates near the roofline were screened with fine mesh to prevent dust infiltration. Even the overhead electrical service was heavier than necessary for basic lighting, suggesting power requirements for sophisticated equipment. The first padlock clicked open with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the morning stillness. Tyler paused, listening for any indication that his activities had attracted attention. But the surrounding countryside remained peaceful. The second lock proved more stubborn, its mechanism corroded by years of exposure, but finally yielded to persistent pressure. With both locks removed, Tyler grasped the handle of the left door and pulled. The massive panel moved smoothly on well-maintained rollers, revealing that Frank had invested in quality hardware, despite the building's rustic appearance. As the door slid open, revealing the first glimpse of the barn's interior, Tyler felt his breath catch in his throat. Even in the dim light filtering through the doorway, he could see the unmistakable silhouettes of automobiles arranged in neat rows throughout the cavernous space. But these weren't the rusted hulks he had expected, based on Frank's reputation as a collector of automotive detritus. Even covered with tarps and decades of accumulated dust, The shapes beneath suggested vehicles that had been carefully preserved rather than simply abandoned. Tyler pulled the second door open, flooding the barn with morning sunlight that revealed the true scope of Frank's hidden collection. Two rows of cars stretched from the front of the building to the rear wall, perhaps 20 vehicles in total, each one draped with heavy canvas tarps that had protected them from dust and moisture. The concrete floor was remarkably clean, with drain systems that indicated Frank had designed the space for long-term automotive storage. His hands trembling slightly with anticipation, Tyler approached the nearest covered vehicle and grasped a corner of its protective tarp. The canvas was heavy and expensive, designed for serious preservation rather than casual protection. As he pulled it away, revealing the car beneath, Tyler felt his knees nearly buckle with shock. Sitting before him in pristine condition that defied its decades of storage was a 1970 Plymouth Barracuda with the distinctive dual scoop hood that marked it as a 426 Hemi model. The car's lemon twist yellow paint gleamed as if it had been detailed yesterday, its chrome bumpers and trim pieces reflecting the morning light like mirrors. Every visible detail suggested factory original condition, from the correct date-coded tires to the proper markings on all external components. Tyler walked slowly around the CUDA, his trained eye cataloging details that confirmed what he was seeing. The VIN tag was intact and matched the engine's casting numbers. The color combination was correct for the model year. Even the undercarriage showed the proper factory markings and date stamps that indicated this wasn't a restoration, but an actual survivor car that had been preserved in as-delivered condition. Jesus Christ, Tyler whispered, his voice barely audible in the barn's cathedral-like space. He knew enough about the classic car market to understand that an original 426 Hemi Cuda in this condition was worth at least $500,000, possibly twice that depending on its documentation and rarity options. And there were 19 more cars waiting under their protective covers. Tyler moved to the next vehicle with growing excitement, pulling away its tarp to reveal a 1969 Dodge Charger RT in factory B5 blue. Like the Cuda, it appeared to be completely original with the 440 Magnum engine and 4-speed transmission that made it one of the most desirable muscle cars ever produced. The odometer showed only 847 miles, a figure that seemed impossible until Tyler examined the car's documentation. An envelope taped to its windshield contained the original window sticker dealer invoice, warranty cards, an owner's manual, all confirming that this Charger had been purchased new in 1969 and driven sparingly before being placed in storage. The paperwork trail was complete, establishing provenance that would satisfy the most demanding collector or auction house. The third car made Tyler sit down heavily on a nearby workbench, overwhelmed by the implications of what he was discovering. A 1967 Shelby GT500, identical to James Wilson's car, but showing only 100 miles on its odometer. The Wimbledon white paint was flawless, the blue racing stripes applied with factory precision. This wasn't just a rare car, it was essentially a new 1967 Shelby that had been preserved in museum-quality condition for over 50 years. Tyler spent the next 3 hours methodically uncovering and documenting each vehicle in Frank's collection, his amazement growing with each revelation. A 1970 Chevelle SS 454 with the legendary 450 horsepower LS6 engine, a 1969 Camaro Z28 with the Trans Am racing package, a 1968 Mustang GT500 KR, the king of the road, that represented the pinnacle of Shelby's collaboration with Ford. Each car was more spectacular than the last, representing the absolute cream of American muscle car production from the golden era of high-performance street machines. But what made the collection truly extraordinary wasn't just the rarity of individual vehicles, but their uniformity of condition. Every car showed minimal mileage, complete documentation, and factory original specifications that would satisfy the most rigorous authentication process. As Tyler reached the rear of the barn, he discovered something that made him question whether he might be hallucinating from the overwhelming nature of his discoveries. Sitting beneath the final tarp was a 1971 Plymouth Hemi Cuda convertible in high-impact orange, equipped with the 426 Hemi engine that made it one of the rarest and most valuable muscle cars ever produced. The combination of body-style engine and model year represented automotive unicorn territory, with examples selling at auction for prices that approached $3 million. But it was the car's documentation that truly took Tyler's breath away. Attached to the windshield was not just the usual envelope of paperwork, but a leather portfolio containing correspondence between Frank and Chrysler's Special Vehicles Department. The letters dating from 1971 detailed a special order placement for what the factory had designated as an engineering evaluation vehicle, essentially a prototype built to explore the limits of the CUDA platform. According to the documentation, only 3 such vehicles had been built, with 2 destroyed in testing, and the third sold through a special arrangement to Franklin Hayes, who had apparently worked as a consulting engineer for Chrysler during the muscle car era. The revelation that Uncle Frank had been directly involved in the development of some of the most legendary performance cars ever built added another layer of significance to his hidden collection. Tyler sat in the driver's seat of the Hemi Cuda convertible, trying to process the magnitude of what he had inherited. Conservative estimates suggested that the 20 vehicles in Frank's barn represented a combined value approaching $15 million. But several of the cars, particularly the one-off prototypes and ultra-low mileage examples, could command prices that pushed the total collection value well beyond any reasonable calculation. The financial implications were staggering, but Tyler found himself focusing on something more profound than mere monetary worth. This collection represented the automotive equivalent of a master's gallery, assembled by someone who understood not just the investment potential of these machines, but their significance as expressions of American engineering creativity during an era when manufacturers competed to build the fastest, most powerful streetcars imaginable. Frank had somehow acquired and preserved examples of virtually every significant muscle car produced during the Golden Age, maintaining them in condition that bordered on the miraculous. The collection told the story of an entire automotive era through its finest representatives, each car a chapter in the narrative of American performance engineering. Tyler was startled from his contemplation by the sound of a vehicle approaching the barn. Through the open doors, he could see James Wilson's distinctive Shelby GT500 pulling into the driveway, followed by Daniel Roberts' Mercedes and a third car he didn't recognize. The convoy suggested coordination rather than coincidence, indicating that his earlier visitors had been monitoring his activities and had decided to respond to his investigation of the barn's contents. Wilson was the first to reach the barn entrance, his practiced smile faltering as he took in the revealed collection. Behind him, Roberts' expression shifted from professional confidence to barely concealed shock. The third man, elderly and well-dressed, moved with the careful deliberation of someone accustomed to high-stakes negotiations. "Mr. Hayes," Wilson said, his voice tight with controlled emotion, "I see you've decided to explore your inheritance." Tyler stood slowly, aware that the dynamics of his situation had changed dramatically. Yesterday, he had been a struggling mechanic fielding lowball offers for unknown contents. Today, he stood surrounded by automotive treasures that represented generational wealth and historical significance. "Just taking inventory," Tyler replied carefully, noting how all 3 men were studying the collection with expressions that revealed both knowledge and hunger. The elderly man stepped forward, extending his hand with old-world courtesy. "Mr. Hayes, I'm Alexander Pierce from Pierce Rare Automobiles. I believe my associates have been discussing various arrangements regarding your uncle's collection." Tyler recognized the name immediately. Pierce Rare Automobiles was legendary in collector car circles, handling transactions for museums and the world's wealthiest enthusiasts. Alexander Pierce's presence indicated that word of Frank's collection had reached the highest levels of the classic car world. "Gentlemen," Tyler said, his voice carrying new authority, "I think we need to have a more honest conversation about what exactly you've been trying to purchase." Wilson's mask slipped, completely revealing frustration and calculation in equal measure. "Hayes, you don't understand what you're dealing with here. This collection represents obligations and arrangements that go back decades." "What kind of obligations?" Tyler asked, moving to position himself where he could see all 3 men clearly. Pierce answered with the measured tones of someone accustomed to complex negotiations. "Your Uncle Franklin was not simply a collector, Mr. Hayes. He served as a curator and custodian for vehicles that were placed with him for safekeeping by various parties. Some of those arrangements included specific provisions for disposition of the vehicles upon his death." The implication was clear, and Tyler felt his brief euphoria beginning to cloud with complications. If some of the cars weren't actually Frank's to bequeath, his inheritance might be far more complex than a simple collection of valuable automobiles. But as he looked around the barn at the 20 automotive masterpieces that surrounded him, Tyler realized that even partial ownership of this collection would transform his life completely. The question now was not whether he had inherited something valuable, but whether he possessed the knowledge and determination to navigate the complex world of collectors, dealers, and legal arrangements that his discovery had thrust him into. Morning sun streaming through the barn's open doors illuminated dust motes that danced in the air like golden possibilities, at each one representing a different path forward for a man who had awakened thinking himself trapped by circumstances beyond his control. Tyler looked at the three men surrounding him, their expressions ranging from barely controlled frustration to calculating patience, and felt the familiar tightness in his chest that always preceded difficult conversations about his past. The morning light streaming through the barn's open doors seemed to dim as memories he had worked hard to suppress began surfacing with unwelcome clarity. Before we discuss any arrangements or obligations, Tyler said, his voice steady despite the turmoil building within him, I need to understand exactly what my uncle was involved in, and I think you gentlemen need to understand who you're dealing with. Pierce adjusted his expensive glasses with the careful movements of a man accustomed to navigating delicate negotiations. Mr. Hayes, your Uncle Franklin, was far more than a simple mechanic or collector. He served as a trusted custodian for vehicles that required discreet storage arrangements, wealthy collectors, estate settlements, insurance recoveries. Many of these cars have complicated histories. The explanation felt incomplete, designed to reveal just enough information to establish legitimacy while concealing the full scope of whatever arrangements Frank had made. Tyler had heard similar, carefully worded explanations during his military service, usually from officers trying to justify missions that existed in moral gray areas. Discreet storage, Tyler repeated, walking slowly among the covered vehicles. You mean hiding stolen cars? Wilson stepped forward aggressively. Nothing illegal, Hayes, but wealthy people sometimes need to relocate assets quickly, or estate attorneys need time to resolve complex inheritance disputes. Franklin provided secure storage with complete confidentiality. The explanation rang false to Tyler's trained ear. During his years as a SEAL Team 6 support specialist responsible for vehicle maintenance in Afghanistan, he had learned to detect deception in bureaucratic language. These men were circling around a truth they didn't want to reveal, just as commanding officers had done when explaining why certain convoy routes were classified or why maintenance records for particular vehicles couldn't be shared through standard channels. How long have you been waiting for Frank to die? Tyler asked, directly, the question cutting through their polite maneuvering like a blade. Robert shifted uncomfortably, his attorney's training warring with obvious discomfort at the blunt inquiry. Mr. Hayes, your uncle's health issues were well known. We were simply preparing for eventual transition arrangements. The casual reference to Frank's death as a business planning matter triggered something dark in Tyler's memory. He had heard similar language from military contractors discussing casualty projections, reducing human lives to logistical considerations. The parallel brought back sensations he had worked years to suppress: the smell of diesel fuel and cordite, the weight of body armor in 120-degree heat, the sound of improvised explosive devices detonating beneath convoy vehicles. Tyler closed his eyes briefly, using breathing techniques learned in VA therapy sessions to maintain control. When he opened them, the three men were studying him with renewed attention, clearly noting the brief moment of vulnerability. You're having flashbacks, Pierce observed with surprising gentleness. Combat veteran. The question was asked with the kind of recognition that suggested personal familiarity with the symptoms. Tyler studied the elderly man more carefully, noting details he had missed initially: the precise posture that spoke of military training, the watchful alertness that never fully faded from career soldiers, the way Pierce positioned himself to maintain visual contact with all potential threats. Afghanistan, Tyler confirmed. 2 tours: convoy, security, and vehicle maintenance. Pierce nodded slowly. Vietnam 1st Cavalry Division. Different war, same demons. He gestured toward the collection surrounding them. Your uncle mentioned that his nephew was struggling with readjustment issues. He was quite proud of your military service, even though he worried about what it had cost you. The reference to Frank's concern hit Tyler unexpectedly hard. During his childhood visits to the garage, his uncle had always seemed too absorbed in his automotive projects to pay much attention to family dynamics. The idea that Frank had been following his military career and subsequent struggles suggested a level of care that Tyler had never recognized. He knew about Norfolk, Tyler asked, referring to the weight he had lost after his PTSD symptoms made it impossible to maintain the focus required for shipyard work. He knew about everything, Pierce replied quietly. The panic attacks during night shifts. The incident with the supervisor who pushed you too hard. The way the Navy decided it was easier to eliminate a problem employee rather than accommodate a veteran with service-connected disabilities. Tyler felt his jaw tighten as suppressed anger rose toward the surface. The Norfolk Naval Shipyard job had represented his attempt to rebuild a normal life after military service, using mechanical skills developed in the Navy to earn steady wages in civilian employment. For 8 months, he had managed to hide the worst symptoms of his PTSD, arriving early and staying late to compensate for the moments when flashbacks made it impossible to concentrate on maintenance tasks. The breaking point had come during a particularly demanding deployment preparation period, when Supervisor Danny Walsh had decided that Tyler's occasional lapses in attention represented laziness rather than medical issues. The confrontation had escalated when Walsh began using military terminology, mockingly referring to Tyler as Sailor Boy, and suggesting that veterans receive preferential treatment they didn't deserve. Tyler had managed to walk away from that confrontation without violence, but the damage was done. Within a week, he found himself facing disciplinary action for insubordination and failure to maintain production standards. The union representative had advised him to accept termination rather than fight charges that would follow him to other employers. "How does Frank know about Norfolk?" Tyler asked, though part of him already suspected the answer. Pierce reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a manila envelope yellowed with age and bearing, Tyler's name in Frank's distinctive handwriting. "He asked me to give you this if something happened to him before you two had a chance to talk properly." Tyler accepted the envelope with hands that trembled slightly, recognizing his uncle's careful script. The paper felt substantial, containing multiple documents rather than a simple letter. As he opened it, the first item that emerged was a photograph he had never seen before himself at age 19, standing proudly beside a HMMWV in full military dress uniform, taken during his first deployment to Afghanistan. Beneath the photograph was a letter written in Frank's meticulous handwriting, dated just 3 months before his death. "Tyler, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you finally discovered what I've been saving for you. I know you think I never paid attention during your visits, but I've been watching your whole life. Proud as hell of the man you became, even when the world seemed determined to break you down. I heard about what happened at Norfolk through connections I still have in the automotive industry." Danny Walsh made the mistake of bragging about putting a troublemaker veteran in his place to the wrong people. Some of us old-timers remember when companies actually valued the skills and sacrifice that military service represents. The cars in this barn aren't just an investment, son. They're your future if you want it. Every vehicle here has been restored to absolute perfection, documented completely, and prepared for sale to collectors who understand what they're buying. Conservative estimates put the total value at $15 million, but several pieces could bring significantly more at the right auction. More importantly, this collection represents credibility in the classic car world. Ownership of these vehicles will establish you as a serious player among collectors and restoration specialists. With your knowledge in these cars as your foundation, you could build the kind of business that would honor both your mechanical abilities and your service to our country. The 3 men who are probably standing around you as you read this have been circling like vultures for 2 years, waiting for me to die so they could acquire this collection at a fraction of its value. They've made various arrangements and agreements that they'll claim give them legal rights to individual vehicles. Don't believe a word of it. Every car in this barn is yours free and clear. I spent 30 years acquiring and restoring them specifically to provide you with options that your service-connected disabilities made difficult to achieve through conventional employment. The documentation for each vehicle is complete and stored in the office safe. Combination 7/12/85, your birth date. Use this gift wisely, Tyler. You've earned it through service and sacrifice that these civilians couldn't comprehend if they lived a dozen lifetimes. And remember that sometimes the best revenge against people who underestimate veterans is to succeed so completely that they have to respect you, whether they want to or not. Your proud uncle, Franklin Hayes, P.S. The Hemi-Cuda convertible was always intended to be yours to keep. I restored it thinking about the partner who used to help me in the garage, imagining the man he would become. Don't ever sell that one. Tyler read the letter twice, his vision blurring with emotions he hadn't experienced since his discharge ceremony. The revelation that Frank had been orchestrating this inheritance for years, specifically designed to provide opportunities that Tyler's disabilities had made difficult to pursue through traditional channels, reframed everything about his current situation. The three men waited in tense silence as Tyler folded the letter and looked up at them with new understanding. Gentlemen, I think there's been a misunderstanding about the legal status of these vehicles. Wilson's expression darkened. Hayes, you don't understand the complexities involved here. These aren't simple ownership situations. Actually, I understand perfectly, Tyler replied, his voice carrying new authority. You've been waiting for my uncle to buy so you could pressure his heir into quick sales at below market prices. Unfortunately for you, Frank anticipated your strategy and prepared accordingly. He walked to the Hemi-Cuda convertible and pulled away at its protective cover, revealing the stunning, high-impact orange paint that gleamed like liquid fire in the morning sunlight. This particular car, for example, was restored specifically for me over a period of 3 years. According to the documentation, it's never been offered for sale to anyone. Robert stepped forward, his attorney's instincts recognizing the shift in negotiating dynamics. Mr. Hayes, even if the legal ownership is clear, you're dealing with a market that requires specific expertise and connections. Without proper representation, you could lose millions of dollars to inexperienced handling of these assets. The comment was probably true, but Tyler had learned during his military service to be suspicious of people who offered help, while simultaneously emphasizing his own inadequacy. These men wanted the collection badly enough to coordinate their approach and present themselves as his only viable option for realizing its value. I appreciate your concern, Tyler said diplomatically, but I think I need some time to review all the documentation before making any decisions about representation or sales. Pierce's expression shifted to something approaching respect. A prudent approach, Mr. Hayes, but I hope you'll consider that this collection represents more than financial assets. These cars are historically significant examples of American automotive engineering. They deserve to be owned by people who understand their cultural importance. The comment carried implications that Tyler recognized from his dealings with military officers who believed that certain responsibilities were too important to be left to enlisted personnel. Pierce was suggesting that Tyler, despite legal ownership, lacked the cultural sophistication necessary to be a proper custodian of such significant vehicles. Mr. Pierce, Tyler said quietly, I spent 10 years maintaining vehicles that were literally matters of life and death for the soldiers who depended on them. I think I understand the responsibilities that come with caring for important machines. As the three men departed with varying degrees of frustration and resignation, Tyler stood alone among the 20 automotive masterpieces that his uncle had preserved for him. Frank's letter had transformed his understanding not just of his inheritance, but of his own worth as a man whose sacrifices and struggles had been recognized and honored by someone who truly understood their significance. For the first time since his discharge from the Navy, Tyler felt that his future might hold possibilities beyond simple survival. Within hours of the three men's departure, Tyler discovered that news of the collection's discovery traveled through the classic car community with the speed of wildfire across dry grassland. His phone began ringing incessantly with calls from collectors, auction houses, automotive journalists, and insurance specialists, each wanting to confirm rumors about the Hayes collection that had apparently been circulating in hushed conversations for years. The first call came from Jerry Blackburn at Barrett-Jackson, his voice tight with excitement and disbelief. Tyler, I've been getting calls all morning from people claiming you found some kind of lost treasure trove in your uncle's barn. Please tell me this isn't some elaborate hoax. It's real, Jerry, Tyler confirmed, looking out at the barn where sunlight continued to illuminate the automotive masterpieces that had been hidden for decades. 20 cars and all original, most with the under 5,000 miles. Documentation appears complete on everything I've examined so far. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that Tyler began to wonder if the call had been disconnected. Finally, Blackburn's voice returned hushed, with the reverence typically reserved for religious experiences. Jesus Christ, Tyler, do you understand what you're sitting on? If even half of what I'm hearing is accurate, You're looking at the single most significant barn find in automotive history. We're talking about cars that collectors assumed were lost forever. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes with Blackburn explaining the authentication process that would be necessary to establish provenance and condition for potential auction. I'm going to make some calls, he concluded. There are people who need to see this collection. Experts who can help you understand exactly what your uncle preserved. No sooner had Tyler ended that conversation than his phone rang again, this time displaying a number he didn't recognize. The caller identified himself as Vincent DeMarcus from Haggerty Insurance, the leading specialty insurer for collector automobiles. Mr. Hayes, I'm calling about your uncle's collection. We've been tracking rumors about Franklin Hayes's private hoard for over a decade, but frankly, most of us assumed they were exaggerated stories that grew in the telling. Tyler found himself repeatedly explaining the discovery while trying to maintain some semblance of normal business operations. Customers continued arriving for routine repairs, drawn by word-of-mouth recommendations about his expertise with classic cars. But now they found themselves witnessing something unprecedented in the automotive world. Eleanor Carter returned from her car show in Richmond, her Cuda running perfectly after Tyler's repairs. But instead of the simple thank you visit Tyler expected, Carter brought with her 3 other Mopar owners who had heard about both the engine work and the barn discovery. "Tell Carter," said, her face flushed with excitement. "Tell them what you found. Show them what Franklin left you." Word of the collection had reached the Richmond car show within hours, spreading through the gathered enthusiasts like an electric current. By the time Carter's group departed for home, half the show's participants had heard some version of the story, and phone calls were already being made to collectors, dealers, and automotive media across the country. The most significant call came from Margaret Caldwell, senior automotive specialist at Sotheby's Auction House in New York. Her voice carried the cultured authority of someone accustomed to handling transactions involving the world's most valuable collectibles. "Mr. Hayes, I'm calling regarding your uncle's automotive collection. Sotheby's has been aware of Franklin Hayes' restoration work for many years, and we've had several clients express interest in acquiring pieces from his personal collection should they ever become available." The conversation took an unexpected turn when Caldwell revealed the extent of the art world's knowledge about Frank's activities. "Your uncle was quite famous in certain circles, Mr. Hayes. Not famous in the sense of public recognition, but famous among the people who matter in the collector car world: museum, curators, serious private collectors, restoration specialists. Franklin Hayes's work was considered the gold standard for authentic muscle car restoration." Tyler felt a familiar sense of disorientation as his understanding of his uncle's legacy continued to evolve. "I had no idea he was known outside of this area." "Mr. Hayes, your uncle restored vehicles for some of the most significant private collections in the world. The Peterson Museum in Los Angeles has 2 of his restorations in their permanent display. Jay Leno owns 3 cars that Franklin worked on. When we heard that his personal collection might become available, several of our clients immediately expressed serious interest." The implications were staggering. If Frank's reputation extended to institutions like the Peterson Museum and collectors like Jay Leno, then the cars in the barn represented more than valuable commodities. They were art pieces created by a recognized master craftsman with provenance that would satisfy the most demanding authentication requirements. "Miss Caldwell, what kind of values are we discussing for a collection like this?" Her pause was brief but significant. "Mr. Hayes, depending on the specific vehicles and their condition, we could be looking at individual cars valued between $500,000 and $3 million. For the collection as a whole, assuming proper authentication and documentation, I would estimate somewhere between $15 and $25 million at auction." The figure was so far beyond Tyler's previous conception of wealth that he found himself struggling to process its reality. $25 million represented generational money, the kind of sum that would transform not just his life, but the lives of his descendants for decades to come. But even as he absorbed the financial implications, Tyler found his attention drawn to something Caldwell had mentioned almost casually. "You said individual cars might be worth up to $3 million. Which cars command those kinds of prices?" "Prototype vehicles, one-off factory specials, ultra-low production models with complete documentation. Based on what we know about your uncle's collection habits, he may have acquired examples that museums and serious collectors have been seeking for decades." After ending the call with Caldwell, Tyler walked back to the barn with new appreciation for what Frank had preserved. As he moved among the covered vehicles, he began to understand that his uncle hadn't simply collected valuable cars. He had curated an automotive museum that told the complete story of American muscle car development during its golden era. The afternoon brought unexpected visitors in the form of Dr. James Mitchell and Dr. Sarah Chen from the Automotive Engineering Department at Michigan State University. They arrived in a pristine 1969 Boss 429 Mustang, their professional credentials immediately apparent in their systematic approach to examining the collection. Mr. Hayes, Dr. Mitchell began, "We've driven down from East Lansing after receiving calls from several colleagues about your uncle's collection. From an academic standpoint, what you've preserved here represents an invaluable resource for understanding muscle car development during the 1960s and early 1970s. Dr. Chen moved among the vehicles with the analytical eye of someone trained to recognize historical significance beyond mere monetary value. These aren't just rare cars, Mr. Hayes. They're primary source documents that tell the story of American automotive engineering during its most creative period." As the professors examined individual vehicles, Tyler found himself serving as an impromptu tour guide, sharing details about each car's specifications and restoration history based on Frank's meticulous documentation. To his surprise, he discovered that his years of study and practical experience allowed him to speak knowledgeably about technical details that impressed even the academic experts. "Your understanding of these systems is remarkable," Dr. Mitchell observed after Tyler explained the differences between various Hemi engine configurations. "Have you considered that your knowledge combined with ownership of this collection could position you as a significant authority in the field?" The comment echoed something Jerry Blackburn had mentioned, the idea that Tyler's situation represented more than a financial windfall. The collection provided credibility and access to a world where his mechanical expertise would be valued at the highest levels. "Dr. Mitchell, what exactly do you mean by authority in the field?" "Consulting work for museums, authentication services for collectors, expert testimony for insurance and legal proceedings involving high-value vehicles. The classic car world desperately needs people who combine theoretical knowledge with practical experience. Your military background and vehicle maintenance, plus your obvious understanding of these specific systems, plus ownership of this collection, that's a combination that could command substantial fees." Dr. Chen nodded enthusiastically. "We'd love to discuss the possibility of academic collaboration, case studies, research projects, maybe even guest lectures for our automotive engineering students. The university would be very interested in establishing a formal relationship." As the professors prepared to leave, Dr. Mitchell handed Tyler a business card along with a comprehensive reading list. "These books will help you understand the market forces and historical context that make your collection so significant. Knowledge is power in the collector car world, Mr. Hayes. The more you understand about what you own, the better position you'll be in to make informed decisions about its future." That evening, as Tyler sat in his small apartment reviewing the day's conversations and revelations, he felt the same sense of possibility that had first emerged during his work on Eleanor Carter's CUDA. But now that possibility had expanded beyond simple mechanical competence to encompass expertise that was genuinely valued by institutions and individuals at the highest levels of the automotive world. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Mr. Hayes, this is Alexander Pierce. I'd like to schedule a private meeting to discuss a business proposition that could be mutually beneficial. The collection represents opportunities beyond simple sales transactions. Please call at your convenience." Tyler stared at the message, recognizing that Pierce's tone had shifted from the morning's subtle threats to something approaching respect. The elderly dealer had apparently spent the day making inquiries about both the collection and Tyler himself, and whatever he had discovered had changed his approach significantly. A second text arrived from James Wilson. "Hayes, you need to understand that there are complications with some of those vehicles that go beyond ownership issues. Call me before you make any commitments to other parties. Some of those cars have histories that could create serious legal problems." The contrasting messages suggested that Tyler's position had become more complex as various parties reassessed both the collection's value and his own capabilities. Where the morning had brought barely concealed condescension, the afternoon's contacts reflected growing recognition that he might be more than a simple inheritor of valuable assets. Tyler walked to his window and looked out at the barn where 20 automotive masterpieces waited under their protective covers. 48 hours ago, he had been a struggling mechanic whose future seemed limited to barely profitable repairs on aging vehicles. Tonight, he found himself at the center of the classic car world's attention with opportunities and complications that he was only beginning to understand. The phone rang again this time, displaying a number with a New York area code. Tyler answered to find himself speaking with someone from Road and Track magazine, wanting to schedule an interview about the greatest barn find in automotive history. As Tyler politely deferred the interview request while promising to consider future media opportunities, he realized that his quiet life in Cumberland was ending. The discovery of Frank's collection had thrust him into a world where his mechanical knowledge and military experience were valued commodities, where decisions about individual vehicles could mean the difference between comfortable retirement and generational wealth. But along with the opportunities came pressures and complexities that he was only beginning to recognize. The competing interests of dealers, collectors, museums, and media represented a landscape that would require careful navigation to avoid the kind of exploitation that had characterized his previous encounters with corporate America. Tyler decided he would begin the process of education that would prepare him to make informed decisions about his inheritance and his future. The next morning brought an event that Tyler would later recognize as the moment when his life crossed permanently from one realm into another. He was opening the garage at dawn, preparing for what he expected to be another day of phone calls and curious visitors, when the distinctive sound of multiple high-performance engines announced the arrival of something unprecedented in Cumberland's quiet history. A convoy of exotic automobiles was approaching down Main Street, their combined engine notes creating a symphony that brought residents to their windows and doorsteps. Leading the procession was a pristine 1967 Ferrari 275 GTB4, followed by a Lamborghini Miura, a Porsche 911 Carrera RS, and three additional vehicles that Tyler recognized as representing millions of dollars in combined value. The convoy pulled into his driveway with choreographed precision, their occupants emerging with the confident bearing of people accustomed to commanding attention and respect. At their head was a woman in her early 60s, silver-haired and impeccably dressed, who approached Tyler with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to making important things happen quickly. "Mr. Hayes," she said, extending her hand with firm authority, "I'm Victoria Harrington from the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. I believe my reputation precedes me." Tyler accepted her handshake while his mind raced to process the significance of her presence. The Smithsonian's automotive collection was legendary in museum circles, housing some of the most historically significant vehicles ever created. Victoria Harrington herself was regularly featured in magazines like Automobile and The New Yorker, her opinions on automotive matters carrying weight that could influence museum acquisitions and preservation priorities globally. "Miss Harrington, this is quite an honor. What brings you to Cumberland?" Her smile carried the satisfaction of someone who had achieved a significant objective through careful planning. "Mr. Hayes, I've spent the past 18 hours making calls, reviewing documentation, and consulting with experts about your uncle's collection. What I've learned has convinced me that we're dealing with something that transcends normal collector car transactions." She gestured toward her companions, each of whom Tyler now recognized from automotive media coverage. "Allow me to introduce Dr. William Hartley from the Henry Ford Museum, James Morrison from R.M. Sotheby's Maria Santos from Classic Car Magazine, and Robert Kim from the Concours d'Elegance at Pebble Beach." The introductions hit Tyler like successive waves, each name representing a level of expertise and influence that he had previously encountered only through magazine articles and television coverage. These were the people who determined which cars were displayed at the world's most prestigious events, whose opinions shaped collector preferences and market values. "Mr. Hayes," Dr. Hartley said, his voice carrying the measured authority of institutional expertise, "if the preliminary reports about your uncle's collection are accurate, we may be looking at automotive artifacts that belong in major museums rather than private hands." And the comment was delivered diplomatically, but Tyler recognized the underlying implication. These people had come to assess not just the collection's value, but his fitness as its custodian. They were evaluating whether a small-town mechanic possessed the knowledge and judgment necessary to make appropriate decisions about historically significant automobiles. "Perhaps we could examine the collection," Victoria suggested, though her tone made it clear that this was more command than request. Tyler led the group to the barn, acutely aware of their professional scrutiny as they took in details that revealed the scope and sophistication of Frank's preservation efforts. As he opened the doors and began removing protective covers, he watched their expressions shift from polite interest to genuine amazement. "Dear God," James Morrison breathed as the 1970 Hemi Cuda was revealed in all its pristine glory. This is the lemon twist six-pack that disappeared from the Chrysler Museum inventory in 1985. We assumed it had been destroyed. Dr. Hartley moved immediately to the Hemi Cuda convertible, his trained eye cataloging details that confirmed its authenticity and significance. This is one of the engineering prototypes. We have documentation at the Henry Ford Museum about this specific vehicle. It was supposed to have been scrapped after testing. As each car was uncovered, the group's excitement became increasingly palpable. These weren't simply valuable automobiles, but missing pieces of automotive history that collectors and institutions had been seeking for decades. Maria Santos was photographing everything with professional intensity, already composing what Tyler realized would become a major feature article. "Mr. Hayes," Victoria said after they had examined roughly half the collection, "I need to be direct with you about something. This collection represents more than private ownership opportunities. These cars are cultural artifacts that tell the story of American automotive engineering during its most creative period." Tyler sensed the direction of her argument, recognizing the same institutional condescension he had encountered from military officers who believed important decisions were too complex for enlisted personnel to understand properly. "Miss Harrington, I appreciate the historical significance of what my uncle preserved, but I also understand that he spent 30 years preparing this inheritance specifically for me." "Of course," she replied smoothly, "and I'm sure Franklin had his reasons. But consider the broader implications. Individual ownership means these cars could be scattered to different collectors, their educational value lost. Institutional stewardship ensures they remain together as a complete historical narrative." Robert Kim from Pebble Beach stepped forward with obvious excitement. "Mr. Hayes, I'd like to propose something unprecedented. What if we featured your entire collection as the centerpiece of next year's Concours d'Elegance? 20 cars displayed together with you as the featured owner. It would be the automotive event of the decade." The proposal was breathtaking in its implications. The Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegance represented the pinnacle of automotive exhibition, where the world's most prestigious collectors displayed their finest vehicles before audiences that included celebrities, industry leaders, and automotive royalty. Being featured there would establish Tyler as a major figure in the collector car world overnight. "The exposure would be extraordinary," Maria Santos added enthusiastically. "Cover stories in every major automotive publication, documentary film, opportunities, speaking engagements at collector events worldwide. You'd become the public face of muscle car preservation." Tyler found himself struggling to process the magnitude of what was being offered. 6 months ago, he had been an unemployed veteran whose future seemed limited to basic survival. Now he was being offered opportunities to participate at the highest levels of the automotive world, with recognition that could establish him as a global authority on American muscle cars. But something in the group's eager enthusiasm triggered his military-trained skepticism about offers that seemed too good to be true. During his Navy service, he had learned to be wary of superior officers who presented obviously beneficial orders with excessive enthusiasm, as such presentations often concealed complications or personal agendas. "These are very generous offers," Tyler said carefully, "but I'd need to understand what obligations would come with such arrangements." Victoria's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, revealing calculation beneath her polished exterior. "Naturally, proper display and documentation would require expert oversight. The Smithsonian would be happy to provide curatorial services, ensuring that each vehicle is presented with appropriate historical context." Dr. Hartley nodded enthusiastically. "The Henry Ford Museum has extensive experience with traveling exhibitions. We could develop educational materials that would accompany the collection wherever it's displayed." Tyler recognized what was happening with uncomfortable clarity. These prestigious institutions were maneuvering to gain control over his collection through arrangements that would gradually transfer decision-making authority from him to their professional staffs. The prestige and exposure they offered would come at the cost of his independence, as the collection's owner. "I appreciate all of these opportunities," Tyler said firmly, "but I think I need time to consider the implications before making any commitments." The group exchanged glances that revealed their surprise at his reluctance to immediately accept offers that most people would consider dreams come true. Victoria's expression hardened slightly, suggesting that she wasn't accustomed to having her proposals declined. "Mr. Hayes," she said with carefully controlled patience, "opportunities like these don't remain available indefinitely. The automotive world moves quickly, and timing is crucial for establishing proper recognition." The veiled threat was familiar from Tyler's previous encounters with corporate manipulation, the suggestion that his circumstances made him vulnerable to missing once-in-a-lifetime opportunities through excessive caution or inadequate understanding of complex situations. "I understand the time constraints," Tyler replied evenly, "but these decisions are too important to make without proper consideration of all factors involved." As the group prepared to leave, their enthusiasm dampened by his unexpected resistance to their offers, Victoria made one final attempt to establish leverage. "Mr. Hayes, I hope you'll consider that this collection represents responsibilities that extend beyond personal ownership. These cars are part of American automotive heritage. They deserve to be seen and studied by people who can appreciate their historical significance." After the convoy departed, leaving Main Street, quiet except for the lingering scent of high-octane fuel and the whispered conversations of neighbors who had witnessed the unprecedented visitation, Tyler stood alone among his uncle's cars and contemplated what had just occurred. The morning's events had confirmed that his collection represented far more than valuable assets. These were cultural artifacts whose ownership carried responsibilities and opportunities that extended well beyond personal financial security. But they had also revealed that the automotive world's elite were eager to gain control over the collection through arrangements that would gradually diminish his authority as its owner. His phone buzzed with a text message from Jerry Blackburn. "Tyler heard about this morning's visit. Don't let them railroad you into institutional arrangements. You hold all the cards here. Call me when you are ready to discuss strategy." A second message arrived from Alexander Pierce. "Mr. Hayes, after this morning's developments, I believe you need independent representation to navigate the competing interests now surrounding your collection. Would you consider a private meeting to discuss protective strategies?" As Tyler walked through the barn, looking at the 20 automotive masterpieces that had thrust him into a world of unprecedented opportunities and complex pressures, he realized that Uncle Frank's final gift had been more than valuable cars. It had been the chance to discover his own worth in a context where his knowledge and judgment would be tested against the most demanding standards. The question now was whether he possessed the wisdom and strength to maintain control over his inheritance, while navigating a world where everyone seemed to have opinions about what he should do with cars that belonged to him alone. Looking at the Hemi Cuda convertible that Frank had designated as his personal car never to be sold, Tyler made a decision that surprised him with its clarity. Tomorrow he would begin the process of establishing himself not as a grateful recipient of others' expertise, but as an independent authority whose knowledge and ownership rights would be respected on his own terms. The automotive world might be eager to help him manage his inheritance, but Tyler Hayes had not survived military service and corporate betrayal to surrender control of his future to people whose primary interest was gaining access to his uncle's extraordinary legacy. That evening, Tyler made a decision that would define his approach to the complex situations surrounding his inheritance. Instead of allowing various parties to dictate the terms of engagement, he would establish his own expertise publicly and demonstrate that he deserved respect as more than simply a fortunate inheritor of valuable assets. His first call was to Eleanor Carter, the CUDA owner whose car had started this extraordinary chain of events. "Eleanor, I need a favor. Do you know any journalists who cover the classic car scene professionally? People who would be interested in telling the real story about what I've discovered." Carter's enthusiasm was immediate. "Tyler, I know exactly who you need to talk to. Kevin Marshall from Hemmings Motor News. He's been covering barn finds and restoration stories for 20 years, and he's got a reputation for fairness. Unlike some of these magazine people who just want sensational headlines." The connection proved fortuitous. Within an hour, Tyler found himself in a detailed phone conversation with Marshall, a veteran automotive journalist, whose knowledge of muscle car history rivaled that of any curator or academic expert. Unlike the morning's visitors, Marshall seemed genuinely interested in understanding Tyler's perspective rather than simply cataloging the collection's contents. Mr. Hayes, what I'm hearing about your uncle's collection is extraordinary, but what interests me more is your own background. Word is getting around that you're not just a lucky inheritor, but someone with genuine expertise in these machines. Tyler found Marshall's direct approach refreshing after the morning's diplomatic maneuvering. I've been studying these cars since I was a kid, and I spent 10 years maintaining complex vehicle systems in the Navy. But I think what sets me apart is that I understand how these engines are supposed to feel when everything's working correctly. Can you give me an example? Tyler described his work on Eleanor Carter's CUDA, explaining how he had diagnosed timing and carburetor issues that other mechanics had missed. As he spoke, he realized that his military experience had taught him diagnostic approaches that complemented his intuitive understanding of mechanical systems. That's exactly the kind of insight that separates real expertise from book learning, Marshall observed. And from what I'm hearing, your uncle's collection is going to establish you as one of the most significant figures in the muscle car world overnight. How are you handling the pressure? The question was perceptive, addressing the psychological challenges that Tyler had been struggling with as various parties acted to influence his decisions. Honestly, Kevin, it's overwhelming. Everyone seems to have opinions about what I should do with cars that belong to me. But I'm starting to realize that respect in this world comes from demonstrating knowledge, not from accepting other people's authority. Marshall chuckled appreciatively. Smart attitude. Too many people get intimidated by the institutional names and fancy credentials, but at the end of the day, either you know these cars or you don't, and either you own them or you don't. The conversation continued for another hour with Marshall asking detailed questions about specific vehicles and Tyler's plans for the collection. By the time they ended the call, Tyler had agreed to an exclusive interview and photo shoot that would be featured as Hemmings's cover story, establishing his narrative before other publications could define him according to their own agendas. The next morning brought validation of Tyler's strategic thinking in the form of unexpected support from an authoritative source. Eleanor Carter arrived at the garage driving her pristine CUDA, but this time she wasn't alone. Accompanying her was a man Tyler recognized from automotive documentaries, Wayne Reynolds, host of Chasing Classic Cars, and one of the most respected voices in the collector automobile world. Tyler, Carter said with obvious satisfaction, "I took the liberty of describing your situation to Wayne during a phone conversation last night. He was intrigued enough to drive down from Connecticut to meet you personally." Reynolds' approach was characteristically direct and unpretentious. "Tyler, I've been in this business for 40 years, and I've never heard about a barn find that generated this much excitement this quickly. Eleanor tells me you're getting pressure from all directions about what to do with your uncle's collection." "That's an understatement," Tyler replied, appreciating Reynolds' straightforward manner. "Everyone seems to think they know what's best for cars they've never owned." "Yeah, I've seen that movie before," Reynolds said with obvious distaste. "Rich people and institutions think ownership is just about having money to buy things. They don't understand that real ownership means taking responsibility for preserving and appreciating what you've got." As they walked toward the barn, Reynolds explained his perspective on the collector car world's dynamics. "Tyler, you're in a unique position here. Most barn finds involve cars that need extensive restoration, so the finder has to rely on other people's expertise and resources. But your uncle did all that work already, which means you're holding finished masterpieces that establish your credibility automatically." The observation was astute, highlighting advantages that Tyler had been too overwhelmed to recognize fully. His inheritance wasn't just valuable cars, but completed restoration projects that demonstrated Frank's expertise while establishing Tyler's position as their rightful custodian. When Reynolds saw the collection, his reaction was everything Tyler could have hoped for from someone whose opinion carried weight throughout the automotive world. "Jesus Christ, Tyler, this isn't just a barn find, it's a time capsule. Your uncle preserved the complete evolution of American muscle car engineering in museum-quality condition." But it was Reynolds' next comment that provided Tyler with the strategic insight he had been seeking. "You know what makes this collection really special? It's not just the cars, it's the documentation. Your uncle created provenance that institutions spend decades trying to establish. That gives you authority that money can't buy." Carter nodded enthusiastically. That's exactly what I tried to explain to Victoria Harrington when she called me yesterday. She seemed to think that Tyler would be grateful for their institutional oversight. Reynolds' expression darkened. Victoria called you, that woman's been trying to get her hands on important cars for years always, with the same song and dance about educational responsibility and proper stewardship. What she really wants is to add prestigious pieces to her collection without paying fair market value. On the confirmation of Tyler's instinctive suspicions about Victoria's motivations reinforced his decision to maintain independence rather than accepting institutional arrangements that sounded prestigious but would diminish his control. Wayne Tyler said, "What would you do if you were in my position?" Reynolds' answer was immediate and definitive. "I'd establish myself as the expert on these specific cars before anyone else could claim that authority. Document everything, learn everything, become the person that other experts have to consult when questions arise about American muscle car authenticity and restoration." How do I do that practically? Start by working with Kevin Marshall on that Hemmings article. Make sure it establishes your technical knowledge, not just your ownership of valuable assets. Then begin selectively sharing cars with events where your expertise will be recognized and respected, not just your willingness to loan prestigious vehicles. Carter added her own perspective. Tyler, consider offering authentication services for muscle cars that come up for sale. Your combination of technical knowledge and ownership of documented examples would make you the definitive authority on originality and restoration quality. The suggestions aligned perfectly with Tyler's emerging understanding of his situation. Rather than allowing others to define his role as a lucky inheritor who needed expert guidance, he could establish himself as an expert whose opinions and services would be sought by collectors and institutions. His phone rang, interrupting the conversation. The caller ID showed James Wilson's number, and Tyler answered with new confidence about how to handle the dealer's continued pressure. "Hayes, I hope you're not making any commitments to those museum people," Wilson said without preamble. "There are legal complications involving some of those cars that they don't understand." What kind of legal complications?" Tyler asked, putting the call on speaker so Reynolds and Carter could hear. "Insurance recovery situations, estate settlements that were never finalized, ownership disputes that predate your uncle's acquisition of certain vehicles. You could find yourself in court defending your right to cars that other parties have legitimate claims against." Reynolds' expression suggested he had heard similar threats before. He gestured for Tyler to continue the conversation while he listened for revealing details. "Mr. Wilson, if there are legitimate legal issues, I assume you have documentation to support these claims." The pause before Wilson's response was telling. These are complex situations that require expert legal representation to resolve properly. I'm offering to handle those complications as part of our purchase arrangement. "What purchase arrangement?" Tyler asked. "I haven't agreed to sell anything to anyone." "Hayes, you need to be realistic about your situation. Legal challenges could tie up this collection for years, while attorneys get rich fighting over ownership disputes. My clients are prepared to purchase everything, immediately eliminating any risk of prolonged litigation." Reynolds was shaking his head vigorously, clearly recognizing Wilson's tactics as intimidation rather than legitimate legal counsel. Carter's expression suggested similar skepticism about the dealer's claims. "Mr. Wilson, I appreciate your concern, but I'll handle any legal issues through my own representation." After ending the call, Reynolds' assessment was blunt. "That's classic pressure sales technique, Tyler. Create urgency through fear, then offer to solve problems that probably don't exist. If there were serious ownership disputes involving these cars, we would have heard about them years ago." Carter agreed. Franklin was meticulous about documentation and legal ownership. If James Wilson had legitimate claims against any of these vehicles, he would have pursued them while Franklin was alive. The morning's events had provided Tyler with strategic guidance from people whose expertise and integrity he trusted, along with confirmation that his instincts about various parties' motivations had been accurate. More importantly, he now had a clear path forward that would establish his authority rather than surrendering it to others. That afternoon, Tyler began implementing the strategy that Reynolds and Carter had outlined. His first step was calling Jerry Blackburn to discuss authentication services and consulting opportunities. His second was reaching out to Kevin Marshall to schedule the Hemmings interview and photo shoot. His third was contacting the local attorney who specialized in collector car transactions, to review all documentation and ensure his legal position was properly protected. By evening, Tyler had established a timeline for asserting his expertise and independence. The Hemmings article would introduce him to the collector car world as a knowledgeable owner rather than a fortunate inheritor. Authentication consulting would establish his technical authority while generating income that didn't require selling any vehicles. Legal review would eliminate any vulnerability to the kind of pressure tactics that Wilson and others were attempting to use. As he stood in the barn that evening, looking at the 20 automotive masterpieces that had transformed his life, Tyler felt a satisfaction that went beyond financial security. For the first time since his military discharge, he was building a future based on his own knowledge and decisions, rather than accepting limitations imposed by other people's assessments of his capabilities. Uncle Frank's final gift hadn't just been valuable cars. It had been the opportunity to discover that respect and authority could be earned through expertise and determination. Regardless of the circumstances that had brought him to this point, tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. But Tyler now faced them with confidence that he possessed both the knowledge and the resolve necessary to succeed on his own terms. But as he was about to close the barn doors, Tyler noticed something unusual about the workbench at the far end of the building. Unlike everything else in the meticulously organized space, the bench appeared slightly askew. Driven by his military-trained attention to detail, Tyler walked over to investigate. The heavy wooden workbench had been placed against the rear wall, but there was a slight gap between its edge and the barn's wooden siding. Tyler pushed against the bench, discovering that it moved more easily than its substantial construction would suggest. Behind it, partially concealed by shadow, was the outline of what appeared to be a door. Tyler pushed the workbench completely aside, revealing a small door built into the barn wall. It was secured with a simple padlock, different from the heavy-duty hardware that protected the main entrance. Using the ring of keys Frank had left him, Tyler found a small brass key that fit perfectly. The door opened with a reluctant creak, revealing a small room that appeared to be some kind of office or workshop. Unlike the pristine organization of the main barn, this space was cluttered with papers, technical manuals, and engineering drawings. A drafting table dominated the center of the room, illuminated by a dusty overhead lamp that Tyler switched on with a pull chain. The walls were covered with technical specifications and detailed drawings of engine components, many bearing the stamps of major automotive manufacturers Chrysler, Ford, General Motors. But what caught Tyler's attention was a single drawing pinned prominently to the wall directly opposite the door. It showed the cross-section of an engine that looked familiar, but somehow different from the conventional V8 designs Tyler knew intimately. As he studied the drawing more closely, Tyler realized he was looking at something extraordinary, a prototype design for a high-efficiency, high-performance V8 engine that incorporated technologies that seemed decades ahead of their time. The date stamp on the blueprint read, April 1973, just months before the oil crisis that would forever change American automotive priorities. Beneath the drawing was a metal filing cabinet. Tyler pulled open the top drawer to find it filled with meticulously organized folders, each labeled with a project name and date. The folder labeled Project Renaissance contained detailed specifications for what appeared to be a revolutionary hybrid system designed to maintain muscle car performance while dramatically improving fuel efficiency. Tyler's hands trembled slightly as he realized what he was seeing. This wasn't just documentation for the cars in the barn. It was evidence of something far more valuable, pioneering automotive technology that had never been publicly revealed. According to the papers, Frank Hayes had been part of a secret skunkworks team at Chrysler tasked with developing the next generation of performance engines that could survive in an era of fuel shortages and emissions regulations. The final page in the folder was a letter from Chrysler's head of engineering dated October 1973. It read simply, Project Renaissance terminated effective immediately. All materials to be destroyed per corporate directive. Reallocation of resources to fuel economy priorities. And the oil crisis had killed not just the muscle car era, but Frank's visionary work on sustainable high-performance technology. Or so Chrysler had thought. Frank had apparently preserved not just the cars, but the technical innovation that represented American automotive engineering at its most creative and forward-thinking. Tyler sat heavily in the dusty office chair, the full implications of his discovery washing over him. The collection of cars in the main barn was worth millions, but the intellectual property in this hidden room, the designs, engineering solutions, and technical innovations could be worth billions in today's automotive market, where manufacturers were desperately seeking ways to maintain performance while meeting increasingly strict efficiency and emissions standards. This was what the others had been searching for, not just the cars, but the technological secrets they contained. Frank Hayes hadn't just been a master restorer. He had been an engineering visionary whose work had been buried by corporate priorities and economic reality. And now Tyler held not just a collection of historic vehicles, but potentially the keys to the future of American performance engineering. The discovery transformed everything. Tyler wasn't just the inheritor of valuable cars, he was the custodian of an automotive legacy that could change the industry. The responsibility was enormous, but for the first time since leaving the military, Tyler felt a sense of purpose that matched the magnitude of his technical abilities. The hidden room contained the twist that would redefine not just the value of his inheritance, but its significance to American automotive history. Frank Hayes had preserved more than metal and chrome. He had safeguarded innovation itself, waiting for the right moment and the right person to bring it back to life. Tyler spent the entire night in Frank's hidden office poring over the technical drawings and project notes with the focused intensity he had once reserved for mission-critical equipment maintenance. The scope of what Frank had preserved was staggering, not just the Project Renaissance hybrid system, but dozens of innovations that had never made it to production. Variable valve timing systems that predated modern implementations by decades. Computer-controlled fuel management designed specifically for high-performance applications. Lightweight composite materials that could replace heavy cast iron components without sacrificing durability. By dawn, Tyler understood why so many parties were desperate to acquire the collection sight unseen. The cars themselves were valuable, but they served primarily as vessels for the technological innovations they contained. Each vehicle in the barn represented a different aspect of Frank's work, preserved in functional form, rather than just as paper designs. Frank hadn't just been documenting these technologies, he had been implementing them in the very cars he collected, creating working prototypes disguised as restored classics. The realization shifted Tyler's understanding of his inheritance yet again. These weren't just museum pieces to be displayed and admired. They were functional demonstrations of technological paths not taken, engineering solutions abandoned not because they failed, but because market forces and corporate priorities had changed. Frank Hayes had preserved an alternate history of American automotive engineering, a vision of what might have been if the muscle car era had been allowed to evolve rather than end abruptly. As the first light of morning filtered through the office's small window, Tyler made a decision. He would not sell the collection, at least not immediately. And he certainly wouldn't surrender control to institutions that might not understand the true significance of what Frank had preserved. Instead, he would build on his uncle's legacy, using the collection as the foundation for something that would honor both Frank's technical brilliance and his own hard-won expertise. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity as Tyler executed the strategy he had developed with Wayne Reynolds and Eleanor Carter. The Hemmings interview and photo shoot took place 3 days after his discovery of the hidden office with Kevin Marshall, spending an entire day documenting both the collection and Tyler's technical knowledge. Tyler was careful to focus on the cars themselves, making no mention of the technological innovations they contained. That revelation would come later when he was better positioned to control its impact. The local attorney Tyler hired confirmed what he had already suspected. Frank's documentation was impeccable, establishing clear provenance and ownership for every vehicle in the collection. Any legal challenges would be futile, a fact that Tyler conveyed politely but firmly to James Wilson when the dealer made a final attempt to pressure him into a quick sale. Jerry Blackburn from Barrett-Jackson followed through on his offer to introduce Tyler to the auction world, arranging for him to serve as a technical consultant at an upcoming sale featuring several muscle cars. Tyler's detailed knowledge and ability to spot non-original components impressed even the most experienced specialists, leading to additional consulting offers from other auction houses. Throughout this period, Tyler maintained careful control over access to the collection, allowing only selected individuals to view the cars under his direct supervision. Victoria Harrington from the Smithsonian made several attempts to arrange institutional partnerships, but Tyler politely deferred any commitments, explaining that he was still developing his long-term strategy for the collection. Alexander Pierce proved more persistent, requesting a private meeting with increasing urgency. Tyler finally agreed, sensing that the elderly dealer might have information relevant to his plans. The meeting took place in the main barn rather than the hidden office, with the cars serving as silent witnesses to their conversation. Mr. Hayes, Pierce began, his tone respectful rather than condescending. I want to apologize for my initial approach. I underestimated both your knowledge and your determination. That was a mistake I won't repeat. Tyler nodded acknowledgement but remained silent, a negotiating tactic he had learned during his military service. Let the other party fill the silence, revealing more than they might intend. I believe I understand why you're hesitant to sell the collection, Pierce continued. These vehicles represent more than financial assets to you. They're your uncle's legacy, a testament to his vision and expertise. Selling them would feel like betraying that legacy. The observation was astute but incomplete. Tyler maintained his silence, waiting for Pierce to reveal more of his hand. What you may not fully appreciate, however, is the technological significance of what Franklin preserved. These aren't just beautifully restored muscle cars. They're functional demonstrations of engineering innovations that were decades ahead of their time. Tyler felt a surge of satisfaction at the confirmation of his suspicions. Pierce knew about the hidden technologies, or at least suspected their existence. The question was how much he knew and what he intended to do with that knowledge. The automotive industry today is facing challenges remarkably similar to those of 1973, Pierce continued. The push for efficiency, the need to reduce emissions while maintaining performance. Franklin's work could be extraordinarily valuable in addressing those challenges. You're suggesting that there's more to these cars than their historical value, Tyler said carefully, neither confirming nor denying Pierce's assertion. I'm suggesting that your uncle was a visionary whose work was tragically interrupted by market forces beyond his control, and I believe he preserved that work specifically for someone who would understand its significance and have the courage to bring it forward at the right time. Pierce's assessment aligned with Tyler's own conclusions, but he remained wary of the dealer's motives. Why would that matter to you, Mr. Pierce? Your business is selling collector cars, not developing automotive technology. Pierce smiled slightly, as if pleased by Tyler's directness. My business, Mr. Hayes, is connecting valuable assets with the people who can best utilize them. Sometimes those assets are cars. Sometimes they're ideas. In this case, they're both. And who exactly would you connect these assets with? I represent several parties who would be very interested in the technologies your uncle developed. Manufacturers looking for competitive advantages in the current market, engineering firms developing next-generation power systems, even government agencies concerned with reducing dependence on foreign oil. The statement confirmed Tyler's suspicions about Pierce's true role. He wasn't merely a dealer, but a broker for technological acquisitions, someone who facilitated transfers of intellectual property that might not survive public scrutiny. These parties would pay substantial sums for exclusive access to Franklin's work, Pierce continued, far more than the market value of the cars themselves. We're talking about potential licensing agreements worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The figure was staggering, but Tyler had anticipated something similar. The technologies hidden within the collection represented decades of R&D that modern companies could leverage immediately, bypassing years of trial and error. And what happens to the technologies after they're acquired? Tyler asked. Would they be developed and implemented, or simply buried to protect existing investments? Pierce's hesitation told Tyler everything he needed to know. The technologies would be assessed, with the most threatening innovations likely suppressed to protect current product lines and investments in conventional technologies. That would depend on the specific acquirer and their business strategies, Pierce said finally. My role is to facilitate the transaction, not dictate how the assets are utilized afterward. I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Pierce, but I don't think your proposal aligns with what my uncle intended for this collection. Pierce studied Tyler for a long moment before responding. You're planning to develop the technologies yourself, aren't you, to pick up where Franklin left off? The assessment was remarkably accurate, confirming Tyler's impression that Pierce was far more than a simple classic car dealer. I'm considering all options for honoring my uncle's legacy. That's an admirable goal, Mr. Hayes, but an extraordinarily difficult one to achieve. The automotive industry is dominated by established players with vast resources and little interest in disruptive technologies. Even with Franklin's work as a foundation, you'd be facing an uphill battle against entrenched interests and regulatory hurdles. Pierce's warning echoed concerns Tyler had already considered during his long nights studying Frank's technical documentation. The path he was contemplating would be challenging, requiring resources and expertise beyond what he currently possessed. Perhaps, Tyler acknowledged, but I'm not convinced that selling to the highest bidder is the alternative my uncle would have wanted. Then allow me to propose a third option, Pierce said, a partnership rather than a sale. I have connections to independent engineering firms that specialize in developing cutting-edge automotive technologies. Firms that would value Franklin's innovations for their potential rather than their threat to existing business models. The proposal was intriguing, suggesting a path that might honor Frank's work while providing the resources necessary to bring it to fruition. But Tyler remained cautious. What would this partnership entail exactly? You would retain ownership of the collection and control over how the technologies are developed. My role would be to connect you with firms that have the technical resources and market access to implement Franklin's innovations effectively. In return, I would receive a percentage of any licensing or development agreements that result from these connections. The arrangement seemed reasonable, but Tyler had learned to look beyond the surface of such offers. And how would you ensure that these firms don't simply acquire the technologies and then bury them like the major manufacturers might? Pierce smiled, seemingly pleased by Tyler's persistence. By structuring the agreements to require actual implementation within specific timeframes, development milestones, prototype requirements, market introduction deadlines, all backed by financial penalties for non-compliance. Tyler nodded slowly, recognizing the value of such protections. But he still had reservations about Pierce's true motives. Why would you go to all this trouble, Mr. Pierce? What's your real interest in my uncle's work? For the first time, Pierce's polished demeanor faltered slightly, revealing something more personal beneath the professional exterior. Your uncle and I served together in Vietnam, Mr. Hayes, 1st Cavalry Division, 1968. He was a maintenance officer. I was a lieutenant in command of a reconnaissance platoon. Our unit was ambushed during the Tet Offensive, caught in a kill zone with no apparent escape route. Franklin modified our vehicles on the taunt, improvising armor and mechanical improvements that allowed us to break contact and reach safety. 12 men survived that day because of his technical brilliance and courage under fire. The revelation stunned Tyler, casting Pierce's interest in the collection in an entirely new light. This wasn't just business for the elderly dealer. It was personal, a debt of honor dating back more than 50 years. After the war, Pierce continued, we stayed in touch. When Franklin began acquiring and preserving these vehicles, he occasionally asked for my help in locating specific models or negotiating purchases. I knew he was working on something important, though he never shared the full extent of his technical innovations. But I understood that he was preserving something valuable for the future, something that mattered deeply to him. Tyler absorbed this new information, reassessing Pierce's motives and credibility. The connection to Frank through shared military service resonated with his own experiences, creating a bond of understanding that transcended commercial interests. When Franklin became ill, Pierce said, he asked me to keep an eye on his collection and to help you understand its significance when the time came. My initial approach was misguided. I underestimated your capabilities and determination. For that, I apologize. But my commitment to honoring Franklin's wishes remains unchanged. The sincerity in Pierce's voice was unmistakable, suggesting that his interest in the collection went beyond financial gain. He was seeking to fulfill a promise to a fellow soldier, a commitment that transcended business considerations. I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Pierce, and I'm grateful for your service alongside my uncle. But I need time to consider your proposal and to develop my own understanding of these technologies before making any commitments. Pierce nodded, accepting Tyler's position without argument. Of course, take whatever time you need. But remember that others are pursuing these technologies as well. James Wilson represents interests that would suppress Franklin's innovations to protect existing investments. Victoria Harrington would preserve them as historical artifacts rather than developing their practical potential. Only you can ensure that Franklin's work achieves its intended purpose. After Pierce departed, Tyler returned to the hidden office, his mind racing with new possibilities. The dealer's proposal offered a path forward that might balance honoring Frank's legacy with the practical requirements of bringing his innovations to market. But Tyler remained cautious, unwilling to surrender control of the collection until he fully understood its technological significance and potential impact. The next few days brought additional revelations as Tyler continued examining Frank's technical documentation. The Project Renaissance hybrid system was even more revolutionary than he had initially recognized, incorporating energy recovery systems that anticipated modern Formula One technology by decades. The lightweight composite materials Frank had developed for engine components offered weight reductions of 30% without compromising durability, a breakthrough that would transform vehicle efficiency and performance if implemented at scale. Most significant was a complete engine management system designed specifically for high-performance applications, capable of optimizing fuel delivery and ignition timing with precision that exceeded many modern systems. According to Frank's notes, this system alone could improve fuel efficiency by 25% while maintaining or even increasing horsepower, a combination that would have been transformative during the fuel crises of the 1970s. As Tyler deepened his understanding of these innovations, he began formulating a plan that would honor Frank's legacy while leveraging his own technical expertise and military experience. The key wasn't just preserving the technologies, but implementing them in ways that would demonstrate their practical value in addressing contemporary challenges. The opportunity to execute this plan came from an unexpected source. James Mitchell from Michigan State University called to follow up on his earlier visit, expressing continued interest in the collection's educational value. Mr. Hayes, our engineering department is hosting a symposium next month on sustainable performance technologies. Given what we observed in your uncle's collection, we believe there might be valuable historical context that could inform current research directions. Would you consider participating, perhaps bringing one of the vehicles for demonstration purposes? The invitation was perfectly aligned with Tyler's emerging strategy. An academic symposium would provide a platform for introducing Frank's innovations to an audience that would appreciate their technical significance without immediately triggering corporate concerns about competitive threats. I'd be interested, Dr. Mitchell, but I'd like to propose something more substantial than simply displaying one of the cars. What if I presented actual technical innovations that my uncle developed but never published, or patented technologies that might have direct applications to current engineering challenges? Mitchell's excitement was palpable even over the phone. Are you suggesting that Franklin Hayes developed unpublished technologies beyond the restoration work we observed that would be extraordinary from a historical perspective and potentially significant for our current research programs? I'm suggesting exactly that, Dr. Mitchell. My uncle wasn't just preserving these cars as historical artifacts. He was using them as platforms for technical innovations that were decades ahead of their time. Innovations that were abandoned not because they failed, but because market priorities shifted before they could be implemented. The academic's response was exactly what Tyler had hoped for: enthusiastic interest focused on the technical and historical significance rather than immediate commercial exploitation. They arranged for Tyler to present at the symposium with sufficient time allocated to demonstrate both the historical context and the practical applications of Frank's work. The weeks leading up to the symposium were the most intensive of Tyler's life, surpassing even his military training in focus and determination. He selected the 1970 Chevelle SS 454 as his demonstration vehicle, as it contained the most complete implementation of Frank's hybrid system and engine management technologies. Working day and night in the hidden office and the main barn, Tyler prepared detailed presentations explaining the technical principles and practical applications of his uncle's innovations. Kevin Marshall's article in Hemmings Motor News was published during this period, establishing Tyler as a knowledgeable authority rather than merely a fortunate inheritor. The piece focused on his military background, technical expertise, and deep understanding of muscle car engineering, laying the groundwork for his emergence as a significant voice in automotive technology discussions. The symposium itself exceeded Tyler's expectations. The audience of engineering professors, industry specialists, and advanced students responded with increasing excitement as he presented Frank's innovations, moving from historical context to technical specifications and finally to practical demonstrations using the Chevelle's modified systems. What you're witnessing, Tyler concluded his presentation, is not just a historical curiosity, but a viable alternative path for automotive engineering, one that balances performance with efficiency, power with responsibility. My uncle developed these technologies nearly 50 years ago, but their principles remain valid today. In fact, they may be more relevant now than ever as we seek solutions to the same challenges that faced the industry in the early 1970s. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Academic researchers requested access to the technical documentation for study and potential development. Industry representatives expressed interest in licensing specific innovations for modern applications. Most significantly, several independent engineering firms approached Tyler about partnerships to develop and commercialize the technologies. In the days following the symposium, Tyler found himself at the center of a growing network of technical collaborations and potential business relationships. Alexander Pierce's prediction proved accurate. The technologies were valuable not just historically but commercially, with applications extending far beyond the muscle car context in which they had been developed. But as the opportunities multiplied, Tyler maintained careful control over access to the collection and its technological secrets. He was determined to honor Frank's legacy by ensuring that the innovations were developed and implemented rather than acquired and suppressed. Each potential partnership was evaluated not just for financial benefit, but for alignment with this core principle. The breakthrough came 6 months after the symposium when Tyler negotiated a licensing agreement with an independent engineering firm specializing in performance hybrid systems. The agreement included specific development milestones and implementation requirements, ensuring that Frank's innovations would reach the market rather than being relegated to research archives or patent portfolios. With the first substantial licensing payment secured, Tyler began the next phase of his plan, establishing a permanent home for the collection that would serve as both a museum and a research center. He purchased a larger property on the outskirts of Cumberland, converting an abandoned manufacturing facility into a state-of-the-art automotive complex with restoration workshops, research laboratories, and exhibition spaces. The Hayes Collection and Research Center opened 18 months after Tyler's discovery of the hidden office, attracting visitors and researchers from around the world. The museum portion displayed the cars in their original glory, with detailed explanations of their historical significance and technical innovations. The Research Center provided access to Frank's documentation and technological principles for qualified scholars and engineers, ensuring that his work continued to influence automotive development. Tyler found particular satisfaction in establishing a training program for veterans transitioning to civilian careers, providing hands-on experience in automotive restoration and technical innovation. The program honored both Frank's legacy and Tyler's own military service, creating opportunities for those whose sacrifice often went unrecognized in the civilian world. Throughout this period of intense activity and grossing success, Tyler maintained his connection to the personal side of his inheritance. The Hemi Cuda convertible remained his personal vehicle, kept in perfect running condition as a daily reminder of Frank's craftsmanship and vision. He drove it regularly, finding peace in the precise mechanical symphony that his uncle had created decades earlier. On the first anniversary of the center's opening, Tyler received an unexpected visitor. An elderly woman arrived without appointment, asking to speak with him privately. Her name was Margaret Hayes, and her connection to the collection was one that Tyler had never anticipated. "I was married to your Uncle Frank for 3 years in the early 1970s, she explained as they sat in Tyler's office, overlooking the exhibition floor. "We met at Chrysler, where I was working as a technical illustrator in the engineering department. I helped document many of the innovations you've been developing: the hybrid system, the lightweight components, the engine management technology." The revelation was surprising but not entirely unexpected. Tyler had wondered about the precise drafting and detailed illustrations in Frank's documentation, which suggested professional training beyond what his uncle might have possessed. "Frank never mentioned being married," Tyler said carefully, unsure how this new information might affect his understanding of his inheritance. "Our relationship was complicated," Margaret acknowledged. "We were both passionate about the work dedicated to pushing the boundaries of what was possible. But when the oil crisis hit and Chrysler terminated the advanced performance programs, we disagreed about what to do next. Frank wanted to preserve the technologies to keep them alive until the industry was ready for them again. I believed we should move on, adapt to the new reality of fuel efficiency and emissions requirements." She paused, her expression reflecting both pride and regret. Frank was right, of course. The technologies were too valuable to abandon, too important to let die because of short-term market conditions. But I couldn't see that then. I was too focused on career advancement, on finding a place in the new automotive paradigm. Tyler listened intently, sensing that Margaret's story connected to the deeper purpose behind Frank's collection. Why are you telling me this now? Margaret reached into her purse and withdrew a small, leather-bound journal. Because there's something you should know about your connection to Frank, something beyond your status as his nephew. Something he wanted you to know when the time was right. She handed Tyler the journal, its pages yellowed with age, but preserved with obvious care. This is Frank's personal diary from the period when we were developing the hybrid system. It contains not just technical notes, but personal reflections that might help you understand why he left you the collection. Tyler accepted the journal with a sense of profound significance, as if he were being entrusted with a final message from his uncle. Thank you for bringing this. It means a lot to me to understand more about Frank's work and his motivations. There's one entry in particular that you should read, Margaret said, reaching over to open the journal to a page marked with a faded ribbon. October 7, 1973, the day everything changed. Tyler began reading the entry written in Frank's distinctive handwriting. Today I learned that Sarah is pregnant. In the midst of professional chaos, the oil embargo beginning, our projects being terminated, engineers being reassigned to fuel economy initiatives. This personal news brings both joy and terrible timing. Margaret and I are already at odds over my determination to preserve our work rather than abandon it. How will she react to the prospect of parenthood at such an uncertain time? I haven't told her yet, waiting for the right moment, though. In truth, there may be no right moment in these circumstances. The child will be born to a world very different from the one we've known. The era of performance without consequence is ending, replaced by limitations and compromises that feel like surrender. But perhaps that's the wrong perspective. Perhaps this child will see the synthesis that eludes us. Now the balance between power and efficiency, between excitement and responsibility. Perhaps this child will complete the work we've begun, bringing it to fruition in a future more receptive to innovation than our present constraints allow. Whatever happens with the program, with Chrysler, with my marriage, I will ensure that this child has the opportunity to understand what we were trying to achieve. I will preserve not just the technologies, but the vision behind them, the belief that performance and responsibility are not mutually exclusive, that American automotive engineering can lead rather than follow, innovate rather than merely comply. If it's a boy, and I'll name him Tyler, after my grandfather, who taught me to appreciate mechanical precision and engineering excellence, a name that connects the past to the future, tradition to innovation. A worthy heir to the work that matters more to me than career or corporate success. Tyler looked up from the journal, his hands trembling slightly as the implications of what he had just read cascaded through his consciousness. I'm Frank's son, Margaret nodded slowly. Yes, though I didn't know I was pregnant when Frank and I separated. I discovered it weeks later after I had already accepted a transfer to Chrysler's California operations. By then, the division between us seemed too great to bridge. I made the decision to raise you on my own using my maiden name Owens. The revelation transformed Tyler's understanding of his entire life, casting his connection to Frank and the collection in an entirely new light. My adoptive parents, they never told me. They didn't know, Margaret explained. When I met Michael Owens in California, you were just 6 months old. He loved you immediately as if you were his own. When we married, he adopted you legally, and we agreed that it would be simpler for everyone if he was the only father you knew. It seemed the right decision at the time, providing stability and consistency rather than a complicated story about a father you would never know. Tyler struggled to process this new reality, this fundamental shift in his identity and heritage. But Frank knew, he knew I was his son. He discovered it years later after tracking down some of our former colleagues from Chrysler. By then, you were already a teenager, established in your life with what appeared to be a stable family. Frank made the difficult decision not to disrupt that stability by suddenly appearing and claiming paternity. Instead, he watched your progress from a distance, proud of your accomplishments, but respectful of the life you had built. The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity: Frank's interest in Tyler's military career, his concern about the Norfolk incident, his determination to provide an inheritance that would offer options beyond conventional employment. These weren't the actions of a distant uncle, but of a father trying to support his son without disrupting his established life. When you joined the Navy, Margaret continued, Frank was both proud and concerned. Proud of your service, your commitment to something larger than yourself. Concerned about the dangers you would face, the experiences that might mark you forever. He understood those risks better than most, having served in Vietnam. Tyler thought about the photograph Frank had kept himself at 19 in his dress uniform, a moment of pride captured by someone who valued it enough to preserve it for years. Not an uncle maintaining a casual interest, but a father treasuring evidence of his son's achievements. After your discharge and the difficulties at Norfolk, Margaret said, Frank became more determined to establish a connection. He arranged for you to be notified about his estate, hoping that the inheritance would provide both financial security and a meaningful legacy. He believed you would understand the significance of the collection because you shared his mechanical intuition, his ability to hear what engines were saying beneath their surface noise. The observation struck Tyler with particular force, explaining the uncanny similarity between his diagnostic approach and the methodology documented in Frank's technical notes. This wasn't just shared interest or parallel development, it was inherited talent, a genetic predisposition toward mechanical understanding that connected father and son across decades of separation. Why tell me now? Tyler asked, still struggling to integrate this new knowledge into his understanding of himself and his work with the collection. Because you've done exactly what Frank hoped you would do, Margaret replied. You've recognized the value of the technologies not just as historical artifacts, but as viable solutions to contemporary challenges. You've honored his vision by bringing these innovations forward rather than simply preserving them. You've completed the work he began just as he believed you might. Her expression softened with a mixture of pride and regret. And because you deserve to know the truth about your heritage, to understand that your connection to these technologies goes beyond inheritance or professional interest. This is your legacy in the most personal sense, the work your father preserved specifically for you, believing in your ability to recognize its value and fulfill its potential. The revelation transformed Tyler's perception of everything he had accomplished since discovering the collection. What he had understood as fortunate inheritance was in fact deliberate legacy. What he had attributed to coincidental aptitude was in fact shared genetic heritage. What he had pursued as professional opportunity was in fact the completion of a vision that connected him directly to his biological father. Thank you for telling me, Tyler said finally, his voice steady despite the emotional turmoil beneath. It changes everything, and yet in another sense it simply confirms what I've felt since I started working with the collection. A connection that went beyond intellectual interest or professional opportunity. A sense of rightness, of completing something that was waiting specifically for me. Margaret smiled, the weight of a decades-old secret finally lifted. Frank would be proud of what you've accomplished. Not just preserving his work, but extending it, bringing it to life in ways he could only imagine. You've honored his legacy in the truest sense, not by simply maintaining what he created, but by building upon it with your own vision and determination. As Margaret departed, promising to share more memories of Frank and their work together during the early 1970s, Tyler returned to the exhibition floor where the cars gleamed under carefully designed lighting. He walked slowly past each vehicle, seeing them now, not just as valuable assets or technological platforms, but as deliberate messages from father to son, a conversation conducted across decades through mechanical precision and engineering innovation. The Hemi Cuda convertible held particular significance in this new context. Frank's instruction never to sell it wasn't just about preserving a valuable asset, but about maintaining a personal connection, a father's gift to the son he had watched from a distance, unable to participate directly in his life, but determined to provide a legacy worthy of their shared talent and vision. 6 months later, the Hayes Collection and Research Center hosted a special exhibition titled Renaissance: The Future That Almost Was. The event showcased not just the original vehicles, but working prototypes implementing Frank's technologies in modern contexts, hybrid systems that maintained muscle car performance while dramatically reducing fuel consumption, lightweight components that improved efficiency without compromising durability, engine management systems that optimize performance across all operating conditions. Industry representatives, academic researchers, and automotive enthusiasts gathered to witness the unveiling of innovations that represented not just historical interest, but practical solutions to contemporary challenges. The technologies Frank had preserved were finally achieving their intended purpose, influencing the direction of automotive engineering decades after their initial development. Tyler opened the exhibition with a brief speech that acknowledged both the historical significance of the collection and its personal meaning. My father, Franklin Hayes, preserved these technologies during a period when market forces and corporate priorities had shifted away from performance engineering. He understood that the principles embodied in these innovations would become relevant again when the industry faced similar challenges in the future. He maintained not just the physical vehicles, but the vision they represented, a belief that American automotive engineering could lead through innovation rather than merely comply through compromise. Today, we're not just celebrating historical artifacts, but implementing practical solutions derived from work that began nearly 50 years ago. The technologies you'll see demonstrated represent both a tribute to the past and a contribution to the future, a renaissance of performance engineering that balances power with responsibility, excitement with efficiency. This is my father's legacy, and I'm honored to bring it forward at a time when its principles are more relevant than ever. The future he imagined is finally becoming reality proof that visionary work endures beyond immediate circumstances, waiting for the right moment to fulfill its potential. As visitors explored the exhibition, moving from historical displays to working prototypes and technical demonstrations, Tyler stood beside the Hemi Cuda convertible, running his hand along its perfect orange finish. The car represented everything his father had valued: precision engineering, innovative thinking, commitment to excellence regardless of external constraints or market pressures. For Tyler Hayes, the collection had become more than valuable assets or even technological innovations. It was the conversation he had never had with his father, conducted through mechanical systems and engineering principles rather than words. A conversation that would continue through the technologies being developed and implemented, the training programs educating the next generation of engineers, the research initiatives exploring new applications for Frank's visionary work. The inheritance that had initially seemed like a burden of rusted metal and abandoned dreams had revealed itself as something far more significant, a father's gift to his son preserved through decades of separation and silence. A legacy not just of valuable possessions, but of shared vision, inherited talent, and the opportunity to complete work that connected past to future through the precision engineering that both men understood at the deepest level. In the gleaming surfaces of the muscle cars that had carried Frank's innovations through decades of obscurity, Tyler saw not just his professional future, but his personal heritage, the reflection of a father who had believed in his son's ability to recognize value that others might miss, to hear the true voice of engines beneath their surface noise, to understand that some legacies are measured not in dollars, but in the innovations they inspire and the lives they transform. 5 years after the discovery of Frank's collection, the Hayes Automotive Innovation Center had become a landmark in both the collector car world and the field of sustainable performance engineering. What had begun as a personal inheritance had evolved into an institution that bridged past and future, honoring traditional American automotive excellence while pioneering technologies that would define its next chapter. The original 20 cars remained the heart of the complex, preserved exactly as Frank had maintained them. But surrounding them were new prototypes and research facilities where engineers, many of them veterans, transitioning to civilian careers, worked to implement and extend the innovations Frank had preserved during the dark days of the 1973 oil crisis. On Veterans Day, Tyler stood before a gathered crowd of engineers, collectors, and local residents. The occasion was the dedication of a new wing of the center specifically designed to recognize the contributions of military veterans to American automotive innovation. 50 years ago, my father returned from Vietnam with a perspective that shaped everything he would accomplish in the decades that followed. He understood that true service doesn't end when the uniform comes off. It continues in how we apply the discipline, determination, and technical skills developed during military service to the challenges we face as a nation. When corporate America chose expedience over innovation, abandoning performance engineering rather than reimagining it for a changing world, Frank Hayes made a different choice. He preserved not just vehicles or technologies, but a vision of what American engineering could achieve when guided by principles rather than quarterly profits. That vision wasn't always recognized or respected by the institutions that should have nurtured it. The automotive industry, like many large organizations, sometimes values conformity over innovation, stability over transformation. My father's work was set aside not because it failed, but because it challenged conventional thinking at a time when convention seems safer than creativity. But true innovation rarely comes from comfortable compliance with established practices. It emerges from the determination to solve difficult problems through ingenuity and perseverance qualities that military service instills and reinforces. The technologies we're implementing today grew from that determination preserved through decades when short-term thinking might have erased them completely. This new Veterans Innovation Wing recognizes that connection between service and innovation. Every exhibit pairs a technological breakthrough with the story of the veteran who helped develop it from World War II through Vietnam, Desert Storm, Afghanistan, and beyond. Because when we honor service, we should recognize not just the sacrifices made during deployment, but the contributions made after returning home. My father understood something that too many corporations and institutions forget, that people who have served their country bring unique perspectives and capabilities to civilian challenges. They've learned to solve problems with limited resources, to maintain complex equipment under difficult conditions, to place mission success above personal recognition. These are precisely the qualities needed to address the challenges we face today, from energy independence to environmental responsibility. The technologies being developed in this center demonstrate what's possible when we value those qualities rather than viewing them as incompatible with corporate culture or academic tradition. The path hasn't always been smooth. We've faced resistance from established interests, skepticism from traditional engineering communities, attempts to acquire and suppress innovations that challenge existing business models. But persistence, another quality familiar to anyone who has served, has carried us through those challenges. Today, the first production vehicles incorporating Frank's hybrid technology are rolling off assembly lines in Detroit, proving that American performance engineering can lead through innovation rather than merely survive through compromise. The lightweight components he developed are being implemented in everything from race cars to commercial vehicles, reducing fuel consumption without sacrificing durability or safety. This isn't just about cars or technologies. It's about recognizing that service to country creates value that extends far beyond the specific missions we perform in uniform. It's about honoring that service by ensuring that the skills and perspectives it develops find application in addressing our most pressing national challenges. As we look toward the future, I see the next generation of performance vehicles powered not by fossil fuels, but by sustainable energy systems that maintain the excitement and freedom that have always defined the American automotive experience. I see veterans applying their technical skills and mission focus to developing these systems, bringing military discipline and determination to civilian innovation. Most importantly, I see a growing recognition that true patriotism isn't measured in symbols or slogans, but in practical contributions to national strength and resilience. My father understood that principle, preserving technologies that would strengthen American engineering when market forces pushed in different directions. That's the legacy we continue today, not just preserving history, but building the future on its strongest foundations. Thank you for being part of this mission. And to all who have served in whatever capacity, your contribution doesn't end when the uniform comes off. It continues in everything you build, maintain, and improve in the years that follow. That's the truth my father preserved along with these cars and technologies, a truth this center exists to honor and extend.